The bullet tore through frozen air 3 inches from Gideon Vance's skull, close enough he felt wind burn his temple. His finger found the trigger as Caleb Mercer's voice cut through the Montana blizzard. "She belongs to me, Mountain Man." Behind Gideon, Vivian Ashcroft stood with trembling hands wrapped around a rifle she'd never fired, caught between the brutal wilderness that nearly killed her and the monster who claimed to own her. Everything led to this moment: the crash, the storm, the lies. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The wolf died hard. Gideon Vance knelt in 3 feet of snow, watching steam rise from the gray timber wolf's open mouth. The animal had fought like hell, torn a gash across his forearm deep enough he'd carry the scar until his own death came calling. Blood dripped from Gideon's knife onto white powder, turning it the color of rust. "Should have run when you had the chance," he muttered. The wolf's yellow eyes glazed over. Gideon cleaned his blade on his buckskin coat, added the pelt to his pack, and stood. Around him, the Montana wilderness stretched endless and white under a sky the color of old iron. Wolverine Peak rose behind him like a frozen tombstone marking the grave of civilization. 15 years he'd lived up here. 15 years since he'd spoken more than 10 words to another human being. That was exactly how he wanted it. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of more snow. Gideon knew these mountains the way some men knew their wives. Every mood, every warning sign, every promise of violence. A storm was building, not the kind that dusted the valley with pretty snowflakes, the kind that buried wagons and froze cattle standing up. He needed to get back to the cabin. Gideon moved through the forest like smoke, 6'4" and 230 pounds of muscle and scar tissue wrapped in animal skins. His black beard hung thick and wild, shot through with gray he hadn't bothered looking at in years. The townspeople down in Copper Falls called him the ghost of Wolverine Peak. Some claimed he wasn't human at all, just another predator wearing a man's shape. Let them talk. He hadn't descended that mountain in 4 years, and he had no intention of breaking the streak. The cabin sat in a clearing halfway up the western slope, built from logs Gideon had cut and notched himself. Smoke leaked from the stone chimney. Snowshoes and steel traps hung from the porch beams. A winter's worth of split firewood stood stacked against the north wall. Home. He pushed through the door into familiar darkness. The fire had burned down to coals. Gideon fed it kindling, then larger pieces, nursing it back to life. Heat spread through the single room, 15 by 20 feet of survival carved from wilderness. A rope bed in one corner, a rough-hewn table and single chair, shelves holding tin plates, a coffee pot, ammunition. Furs piled thick on the floor. Everything a man needed, nothing he didn't. Gideon shrugged out of his coat and checked the wound on his forearm. The bleeding had stopped. He poured whiskey over it, gritted his teeth against the burn, then wrapped it with a strip of cloth. The wolf had earned that bite. Gideon respected that. Respect was easier than trust. Trust got you killed. He fried salted pork in a cast-iron skillet, ate standing by the fire, then sat at the table to work on the wolf pelt. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, scraping flesh from hide. Outside, wind began to howl. Snow hissed against the shuttered windows. The storm had arrived. Gideon worked until his fingers ached, then banked the fire and lay down on the rope bed. Sleep came quickly up here. The kind of deep, dreamless unconsciousness that came from physical exhaustion and emotional numbness. He didn't dream about her anymore. About Sarah. About the baby who never drew breath. That's what he told himself anyway. 3 days later, the storm still hadn't broken. Gideon stood on his porch in the gray dawn light, studying the changed landscape. 4 feet of new snow had reshaped the clearing. Drifts rose 8 feet high against the tree line. The sky hung low and heavy, promising more. He needed to check his trap line before the next wave hit. Gideon strapped on snowshoes, slung his rifle across his back, grabbed his pack. The cold hit him like a fist, 20 below, maybe colder. The kind of cold that could kill a man in an hour if he wasn't careful. Gideon had stopped being careful around the same time he'd stopped caring whether he lived or died. Funny thing was, he'd survived anyway. He He worked his way down the mountain, checking traps in a wide circuit that took him 3 miles south toward the old wagon road. Most were empty. The storm had driven the animals into their dens. He reset each one anyway, muscle memory guiding frozen fingers. The wind shifted, and Gideon caught a smell that didn't belong. Smoke. Not wood smoke. Something chemical and wrong. He changed direction, following his nose. The terrain dropped sharply here, falling away toward a narrow ravine where spring runoff carved a seasonal creek. In summer, wagons used this route to bypass the steeper switchbacks. In winter, nothing moved through here. Nothing should be here at all. Gideon crested a rise and stopped dead. Below him, in the ravine, lay the wreckage of a stagecoach. Not recent wreckage. The coach had been there at least 2 days, maybe 3, slowly disappearing under accumulating snow. One wheel had shattered. The whole frame listed hard to the left, half buried in a drift. The team was gone. Cut loose or run off. The driver's bench sat empty. Gideon's first instinct was to turn around and forget he'd seen it. Not his problem. The mountains killed people every winter, froze them, buried them, swallowed them whole. That was the price of trying to force civilization through wilderness. He started to walk away. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it under the wind. A ragged breath. A weak cough. "Son of a bitch," Gideon whispered. He slid down the ravine bank, snow cascading around him. Up close, the wreckage looked worse. The coach door hung open. Inside he could see shapes that had once been people, now frozen into grotesque sculptures. The breathing came from underneath. Gideon dropped to his knees and started digging with his bare hands, throwing snow aside in wild handfuls. His fingers hit fabric. He dug harder, uncovering a woman's shoulder, then her face. She was young, mid-20s maybe, dark hair plastered to her skull, skin white as the snow around her, but her lips moved slightly and frost clouded from her nose in tiny puffs. Still alive, barely. Gideon's mind raced. He needed to get her warm, now. The cabin was a hard 2-hour climb in good conditions, longer in this. She wouldn't survive the trip conscious. Probably wouldn't survive it at all. "Not your problem," a voice in his head insisted. "Walk away." But his hands were already moving, checking for broken bones, assessing injuries, a nasty gash across her forehead, possible frostbite on her fingers and feet. Hypothermia, definitely. But nothing obviously fatal if he could get her warm fast enough. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her from the snow. She weighed nothing, maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. Her head lolled against his shoulder. "Stupid," Gideon growled at himself. "Stupid, stupid, stupid." The climb back up the ravine nearly killed them both. Gideon slipped twice, barely keeping his feet, the woman's dead weight throwing off his balance. By the time he reached level ground, his lungs burned and his legs shook. 2 hours. Maybe less if he pushed hard. He pushed hard. The journey back became a blur of white and gray, each step forward earned through sheer, stubborn will. The woman didn't wake. Her breathing stayed shallow and regular. Gideon found himself checking it obsessively, terrified it would stop. Why the hell did he care? He didn't know. Didn't want to think about it. The cabin appeared through the snow like a miracle. Gideon kicked the door open, stumbled inside, laid the woman on his bed. His hands shook as he stripped off her wet clothes. The heavy traveling dress, the ruined boots, the layers of soaked undergarments. He tried not to look, tried to stay clinical about it, but he couldn't help noticing how thin she was, how her ribs showed through pale skin. City woman. Rich, from the quality of her clothes. What the hell had she been doing on a stagecoach through Montana in February? Gideon wrapped her in every fur and blanket he owned, then built up the fire until the cabin felt like a furnace. He boiled water, tried to get some warmth into her by pressing heated cloths to her chest and stomach. Her skin felt like ice. "Come on," he heard himself saying. "Come on, breathe." Hours passed. The storm outside intensified into a full blizzard. Gideon couldn't have taken her back down the mountain now, even if he'd wanted to. They were sealed in together until the weather broke. He sat beside the bed, watching her face. In the firelight, she looked almost peaceful, young and fragile and completely out of place in his brutal world. Around midnight, her breathing changed, deepened. Her eyelids fluttered. Gideon leaned forward. Can you hear me? No response. But color had started to return to her cheeks, a faint pink flush replacing the deathly white. She was going to live. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She was going to live, which meant he'd saved her, which meant he was responsible for her, which meant his carefully constructed isolation was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. "What the hell have you done?" he asked himself. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the fire crackled. And in his bed, wrapped in furs, a stranger slept on while Gideon Vance's entire world began to shift beneath his feet. She woke screaming. Gideon jerked upright in his chair where he dozed off. The woman thrashed in the bed, fighting against the blankets like they were attacking her. Her eyes flew open, wild, unfocused, filled with terror. "The coach!" she gasped. "We're falling." "You're safe." Gideon stayed in his chair, keeping his distance. A frightened woman was more dangerous than a cornered wolf. "You're in a cabin. The storm—" She scrambled backward until she hit the wall, clutching furs to her chest. Her gaze darted around the room, the rough walls, the single window, the door, before landing on Gideon. Her scream could have shattered glass. "Easy!" Gideon raised his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." "Where am I? Who are you? What happened to the others?" The words tumbled out in a cultured Eastern accent. Boston, maybe. Definitely not Montana. "You were in a coach wreck. 3 days ago, near as I can figure. I found you yesterday." Gideon kept his voice level, the same tone he'd used with the spooked horse. "Everyone else was already gone." "Gone." She repeated the word like it was foreign. Her face crumpled. "Mrs. Blackwood. The driver. Thomas. Oh, God. Thomas was riding guard." Tears came then, hard and wrenching. The woman buried her face in the furs and sobbed. Gideon sat frozen, utterly lost. He hadn't comforted anyone in 15 years. Didn't remember how. Wasn't sure he wanted to remember. He settled for silence, letting her cry it out. Eventually, the sobs quieted to hiccups, then to ragged breathing. She lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, but clearer now, focused. "Who are you?" she asked again, quieter this time. "Gideon Vance. I'm Vivian. Vivian Ashcroft." She paused. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Vance." "Gideon." Then Gideon. She studied him with unsettling directness. "How long have I been here?" "Day and a half. You were damn near frozen when I found you." Vivian looked down at herself, seemed to register for the first time that she was naked under the furs. Her cheeks flushed. "My clothes, drying by the fire. They were soaked through. You'd have died if I'd left them on." Gideon stood, moved to the hearth where her dress hung on a makeshift line. He kept his back turned. "They'll be ready soon." "I see." Her voice had gone cool and formal. "And where exactly are we?" "My cabin, Wolverine Peak, about 15 miles north of Copper Falls." 15 miles. Vivian's laugh came out brittle. "How long until we can leave?" Gideon turned to face her. "Look outside." She followed his gaze to the window. Through gaps in the shutters, white chaos swirled. The blizzard had intensified overnight. Snow fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet. "That's been going for 4 days, Gideon said. "Might go another 3, maybe more. Even after it stops, it'll take time for the drifts to settle enough to travel." "So we're trapped here." "That's about the size of it." Vivian closed her eyes. Her jaw tightened. "For how long?" "Week, maybe 2. 2 weeks." She opened her eyes, and Gideon saw something shift in them, fear giving way to something harder. "Alone. With a man I don't know, in the middle of nowhere." "I already told you, you're not going to hurt me." "Yes, I heard." Vivian's gaze didn't waver. "Forgive me if I don't take you at your word. I've learned not to trust what men say." The bitterness in her voice caught Gideon off guard. He'd expected fear, maybe gratitude, not this sharp-edged wariness. "Fair enough," he said, "but we're stuck together either way. Storm doesn't care what you trust." "No, I suppose it doesn't." Silence fell between them, heavy and awkward. Gideon had no idea what to say next. Small talk had died along with his wife. He'd forgotten how to navigate conversation that didn't involve bartering for supplies or warning trespassers off his mountain. Vivian solved the problem by asking, "Is there anything to eat? I'm starving. Right. Food. That he could handle. Gideon ladled venison stew from the pot hanging over the fire. He'd made it that morning, some instinct telling him she'd wake hungry. He poured it into a tin bowl, grabbed a spoon, carried both to the bed. Vivian took the bowl with shaking hands. She stared at the contents like they might bite her. It's just meat and vegetables, Gideon said. Nothing fancy. I can see that. She took a tentative bite, chewed carefully, swallowed. Then she dug in like a woman who hadn't eaten in days. Because she hadn't. Gideon watched her demolish the stew in under 2 minutes. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, a gesture so unconsciously crude he almost smiled. Better? He asked. Much. Thank you. Vivian pulled the furs tighter around herself. How bad is it? The frostbite? Your fingers and toes got nipped, but they'll heal. The cut on your head needed cleaning. You'll have a scar. She touched her forehead gingerly, found the bandage he'd wrapped there. I don't remember hitting my head. Probably happened when the coach went over. You remember the crash? Vivian's face went distant. We were trying to make Copper Falls before the storm hit. The driver kept saying we'd beat it. Then the wheel broke, just snapped, and we were sliding. Mrs. Blackwood was screaming. Thomas tried to jump clear. Her voice cracked. I don't remember anything after that. The coach rolled, ended up in a ravine half a mile from here. Gideon didn't mention the frozen bodies. She didn't need those details. You got thrown clear, landed in a drift. The snow probably saved your life, kept you from freezing as fast as you would have otherwise. Lucky me. The sarcasm was sharp enough to draw blood. Gideon let it pass. He grabbed her dress from the line, felt the fabric. Still damp, but wearable. This is dry enough. I'll step outside while you get dressed. Outside? In that? Vivian gestured at the window. I've been through worse. He pulled on his coat and stepped onto the porch before she could argue. The cold hit him like a wall, but he welcomed it. Inside that cabin, the air felt too close, too charged with things he didn't want to think about. A woman. In his cabin. In his bed. Gideon leaned against the porch railing and stared into the blizzard. Snowflakes stung his face. Wind tore at his beard. He should have left her in that ravine. The thought came unbidden, brutal in its honesty. He should have turned around, walked away, let nature take its course. That's what the old Gideon would have done. The one who understood that caring about people only led to loss. But he hadn't. Some stupid, stubborn part of him that refused to die had made him dig her out, save her, bring her here. Now he'd have to live with the consequences. The door opened behind him. You can come back in, Vivian called. I'm decent. Gideon stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. Vivian stood by the fire, dressed in her wrinkled traveling outfit. The heavy dress hung on her thin frame. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, drying in waves. She looked fragile, lost, completely out of place among the rough-hewn furniture and animal pelts. There's only one bed, she said. You can have it. I'll sleep on the floor. For 2 weeks? If that's what it takes. Vivian studied him with those unsettlingly direct eyes. You really aren't going to hurt me, are you? No? Why not? The question surprised him. What kind of question is that? An honest one. Vivian crossed her arms. I'm alone with you, trapped. You could do whatever you wanted. Why should I believe you won't? Because I'm not that kind of man, Gideon said flatly. All men say that. Yeah? Well, I don't care what all men say. I care what I say. And I say you're safe here. They stared at each other across the small room. Gideon felt something shift in the air between them. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the first fragile possibility of it. Vivian broke the stare first. I suppose I don't have much choice. No, you don't. Then I'll take you at your word. She moved to the bed, sat down carefully. For now. Fair enough. The first 3 days were hell. Not because of conflict, because of silence. Vivian kept to the bed or the chair by the fire, moving as little as possible. She barely spoke except to answer direct questions. When Gideon cooked, she ate. When he offered her water, she drank. But conversation died before it started. Gideon told himself he preferred it this way. Silence was comfortable, safe, but the cabin felt different with her in it, smaller. Every time he turned around, she was there, reading one of his 3 books, staring into the fire, watching him with that careful, wary expression. It made him want to crawl out of his own skin. On the 4th day, the blizzard finally broke. Gideon woke to eerie quiet. No wind howling, no snow battering the shutters. He opened the door and found the world transformed. Fresh snow covered everything in pristine white. The sky had cleared to pale blue. Sunlight sparkled off ice crystals like scattered diamonds, beautiful and deadly. The temperature had dropped even further. Gideon's breath froze instantly. He estimated 30 below, maybe colder, too cold to travel even if the snow had been packed. He spent the morning digging out, clearing the porch, making a path to the woodpile, checking that the shutters hadn't been damaged. Vivian watched from the window. When he came back inside, she had coffee waiting. "Thank you," he said, surprised. "I can make coffee. I'm not completely helpless." She poured herself a cup and sat at the table. "How long before we can leave?" "Still a week at least. Maybe more. The snow needs to settle, and it's too cold right now. You'd freeze before we made it a mile." Vivian's shoulders sagged. "A week? I know it's not ideal." "Ideal?" She laughed, sharp and humorless. "Mr. Vance, Gideon, nothing about this situation is ideal. I'm trapped in a mountain cabin with a stranger. Everyone I was traveling with is dead. I have no idea if anyone is even looking for me. And when I do get back to civilization, I'll have to face—" She stopped abruptly. "Face what?" Gideon asked. "Nothing. It doesn't matter." But the fear in her eyes said it did matter, very much. Gideon sat down across from her. "You were running away from something." It wasn't a question. Vivian's knuckles went white around her coffee cup. "What makes you say that?" "Nobody takes a stagecoach through Montana in February unless they're desperate. And you don't strike me as stupid, so you must have had a damn good reason." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, "If I tell you, will you promise not to send me back?" "I don't make promises I might not keep." "Honest. How refreshing." Vivian took a shaky breath. Fine. Yes, I was running. From an engagement." "Marriage?" "If you can call it that. An arrangement, more like. My father owed money to a businessman named Caleb Mercer. A lot of money. When he couldn't pay, Mercer offered to forgive the debt if I agreed to marry him." Gideon's jaw tightened. "And your father agreed?" "My father was desperate, and Caleb Mercer is very persuasive." Vivian's voice had gone flat. "He made it sound reasonable. A business transaction. I'd live well, want for nothing. All I had to do was stand beside him and look pretty." "So you ran." "So I ran." She met his gaze. 3 days before the wedding, I took what money I had and bought a ticket west. I thought if I could get to San Francisco, maybe disappear." Her voice broke. "But the coach crashed, and now they'll find me anyway, and I'll have to go back." "Who says you have to go back?" "The law, my father, Caleb Mercer, and all his money and influence." Vivian laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. Men like Caleb don't accept no for an answer. He'll find me, and when he does, he'll have to go through me first." The words came out before Gideon could stop them. Vivian stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Good question." Gideon didn't have a good answer. "Let's just say I don't like the idea of a man forcing a woman into anything," he said finally. "And I really don't like the idea of someone tracking onto my mountain uninvited." Something shifted in Vivian's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Your mountain?" "Damn right." This time she did smile, just a little. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges fear had carved there. Gideon looked away, unsettled by how much that small smile affected him. "We should probably figure out how to live together," Vivian said, "if we're stuck here for a week or more." "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't just sit in that bed the whole time. I'll go mad." She gestured at the cabin. "Give me something to do. Teach me something. Put me to work." "You don't need to work." "Yes, I do. I need to feel useful, please." Gideon considered. Having her help would make things easier, and it might keep her from dwelling on whatever waited for her down the mountain. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow morning I'll show you how to split wood." Vivian's eyes widened. Split wood. You wanted to work. That's the work that needs doing. I've never split wood in my life. Then it's about time you learned. The next morning, Gideon woke to find Vivian already dressed and waiting by the door. Someone's eager, he observed. I've been awake since dawn. There's only so many times I can read the same 3 books. Fair point. Outside, the cold had lessened to maybe 20 below. Still brutal, but manageable. Gideon led Vivian to the woodpile and grabbed the axe. First rule, he said. Respect the axe. It's not a toy. It's a tool. Use it wrong and you'll lose a foot. Vivian swallowed. Comforting. Gideon demonstrated the proper stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced. He set a log on the chopping block, raised the axe, brought it down in one clean stroke. The log split perfectly. Your turn. He handed her the axe. Vivian took it gingerly, clearly surprised by the weight. Heavier than it looks, she muttered. Most useful things are. She sat up like he'd shown her, raised the axe, and nearly fell over backward from the momentum. Gideon caught her elbow. Easy. Don't muscle it. Let gravity do the work. How very philosophical. Try again. It took her 7 tries before she managed to split her first log. When she did, her whoop of triumph startled a crow from a nearby pine. I did it! She turned to Gideon, face flushed with cold and exertion, eyes bright. Did you see that? Hard to miss. Can I try another? By noon, she'd split half a cord. Her hands were blistered despite the gloves Gideon had given her, and she could barely lift her arms. But she looked happier than she had since waking up in his cabin. Not bad for a city girl, Gideon admitted. Not bad? I'm extraordinary. Vivian flexed her sore shoulders. I may never move my arms again, but I'm extraordinary. Something in her spirit, that stubborn refusal to quit even when her body was screaming, reminded Gideon of someone, of himself, years ago. They carried the split wood inside, stacked it by the hearth. Gideon made coffee while Vivian collapsed into the chair. Tomorrow, she announced, you're teaching me to trap. Like hell. You said you'd put me to work. Splitting wood is one thing. Trap lines are different, dangerous. More dangerous than slowly going insane from boredom? Vivian challenged. Besides, you need to check them anyway. I'll just come along. Gideon wanted to argue, but the determined set of her jaw told him he'd lose. Fine, he grumbled. But you do exactly what I say. Yes, sir. The way she said it, half mocking, half sincere, made something in Gideon's chest tighten. This was a mistake. All of it. He should have left her in that ravine. But even as he thought it, he knew he'd do the same thing again. The days began to blur together. Mornings, Gideon checked the trap line with Vivian trailing behind, asking endless questions. She learned to reset snares, identify tracks, read the signs animals left in snow. She never complained about the cold or the miles of trudging through hip-deep drifts. Afternoons, they worked around the cabin. Vivian learned to cook over the fire, burned the hell out of venison stew the first time but got better. She learned to scrape and cure pelts, mend clothes with rough stitches, bank the fire at night so it wouldn't die. Evenings, they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they read in comfortable silence. Sometimes Vivian asked about the mountains, and Gideon found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken aloud in years. About the bighorn sheep that came down from the peaks in spring, the way ice formed on the river in patterns like frozen lightning. The time he'd tracked a grizzly for 3 days before deciding it was smarter to let it be. He didn't tell her about Sarah, about the baby, about the life he'd buried along with them. Some wounds went too deep for words. But Vivian seemed to understand that. She didn't push, just listened when he talked and respected his silence when he didn't. In return, she told him about Boston, about growing up in a house full of rules and expectations, about her mother, who died when Vivian was 12, about her father, weak and desperate, who'd sold her to save himself. I don't hate him, she said one night. That's the worst part. I understand why he did it, but I can't forgive him either. Forgiveness is overrated, Gideon said. Speaking from experience? Something like that. She didn't ask what he meant, just nodded and went back to darning socks with clumsy stitches. 2 weeks became 3. The temperature rose slowly. The snow began to settle. Travel would be possible soon. Gideon told himself he'd be relieved when she left. His life could go back to normal. Silent, simple, safe. But the cabin felt different now. Warmer somehow, and not just from the fire. Vivian's presence had changed it, changed him, in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. He caught himself watching her, the way she moved, the small sounds she made working, the rare smile that lit her face when she succeeded at something new. It scared the hell out of him. One morning, Gideon woke to find Vivian already up, standing at the window. She'd pulled on his spare coat, too big for her, hanging past her knees, and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Storm's coming," she said without turning. Gideon joined her at the window. She was right. The sky had gone the color of old bruises. The wind had shifted to the northeast. "Big one?" Vivian asked. "Looks like it." "How long?" "Day? Maybe 2." She nodded slowly. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "I need to tell you something," she said. The serious tone made Gideon's stomach drop. "All right. When the weather clears, when I can finally leave, I'm not going back to Boston." "Didn't figure you would." "But I can't stay here either." Gideon had known that was coming. Of course she couldn't stay. She had a whole life waiting somewhere. This was just a temporary stop, an accident of fate. So why did hearing her say it feel like a knife between his ribs? "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know yet. West, probably, California. Somewhere Caleb can't find me." Vivian hugged the blanket tighter. "I just wanted you to know, so you weren't surprised when I left. Appreciate the warning." Silence fell between them, heavy with things neither could say. Then Vivian asked quietly, "Why did you save me, Gideon?" "Already told you, sir." "No, the real reason." She held his gaze. "You could have left me in that ravine, should have, probably. Saving me was dangerous and stupid, and it's turned your whole life upside down. So why?" Gideon opened his mouth, closed it. What could he say? That some part of him had recognized her, another lost soul trying to survive? That pulling her from that snow had felt like pulling himself from the grave he'd been living in for 15 years? That for the first time since Sarah died, he'd felt something other than emptiness? He couldn't say any of that. "I don't know," he said finally. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Vivian studied his face like she was trying to read a language she'd forgotten. Then she nodded slowly. "Well, thank you for doing the right thing." She turned back to the window. Gideon stood beside her, close enough to feel the heat from her body, far enough that they weren't touching. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall. And in the small, rough cabin on Wolverine Peak, two people who'd spent years running from their pasts stood side by side, watching the storm roll in, neither knowing that the real storm was about to arrive on horseback, carrying guns and vengeance, and a reckoning that would change everything. The storm lasted 3 days and brought 8 more feet of snow. Gideon had seen worse, but not by much. Wind screamed down from the peaks like something alive and angry, rattling the shutters until he thought they'd tear free. Snow fell so thick he couldn't see the woodpile from the porch. The temperature dropped until water froze solid in the bucket before he could carry it inside. They were sealed in tight. No trap lines, no hunting. Nothing but the cabin and each other and the howling darkness outside. The first night, Vivian woke screaming. Gideon bolted upright from his pile of furs on the floor, hand reaching for the rifle before his eyes were fully open. In the dim glow of banked coals, he saw her sitting rigid in the bed, both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes wide with terror. "The crash," she gasped between shaking breaths. "I keep seeing the wheel breaking, Mrs. Blackwood's face. Easy." Gideon stayed where he was, remembering how she'd reacted that first morning. "You're safe. Just a nightmare." It felt real. That's how they work. Vivian wrapped her arms around her knees, rocking slightly. "Do you have them too?" Gideon thought about the dreams that still came sometimes. Sarah's face, the blood, the stillborn silence where a baby's cry should have been. "Yeah," he said. "I have them." "How do you make them stop?" "You don't. You just learn to live with them." She looked at him then, really looked, and Gideon wondered what she saw. A broken man playing at survival? A coward hiding from the world? He'd wondered the same things himself plenty of times. "That's a terrible answer," Vivian said finally. "Didn't say it was a good one. Just true. She nodded slowly, then lay back down. But Gideon could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, and knew sleep wouldn't come easy. My wife's name was Sarah, he heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep, a place he'd kept locked for 15 years. We had a cabin down in the valley, smaller than this one. I was building us a bigger place, planning to finish before the baby came. Vivian went still, listening. There were complications. The baby came early, too early. Gideon stared at the dying coals, seeing the past instead. I rode for the doctor, but the snow was bad, and by the time we got back, his throat closed. They were both gone. I'm so sorry, Vivian whispered. I burned the cabin we'd lived in, took what I could carry and came up here. Figured if I stayed far enough away from people, from caring, it couldn't happen again. Did it work? For a while. The silence that followed felt different than before, heavier, but somehow easier to breathe through. Her name was Margaret, Vivian said quietly. My mother. She died of pneumonia when I was 12. Father never recovered. He just gave up. Started making bad investments, borrowing money from worse people. By the time I was old enough to understand, we were drowning in debt. And along came Caleb Mercer, like a shark smelling blood. Bitterness crept into her voice. He was so charming at first, generous. He'd show up with gifts, offer to help Father with business matters. I thought he was being kind. She laughed without humor. I was an idiot. You were young. I was naive. There's a difference. Vivian pulled the blankets tighter. The first time he touched me, nothing improper, just his hand on my arm, I felt sick, like something was crawling on my skin, but Father was so grateful, so hopeful, and I thought maybe I was wrong about him. You weren't. No, I wasn't. She paused. The engagement party was when I knew for certain. Caleb got drunk and pulled me into the library, told me exactly what he expected from a wife, how I'd dress, who I'd talk to, when I'd smile. Her voice dropped. What would happen if I disappointed him? Gideon's claws curled into fists. He threatened you? Not in so many words, but the message was clear. I was property he'd purchased. The debt was just the price. That when you decided to run? That night. I packed a bag, took the money Mother had left me, Father didn't know about it, and bought the first ticket west. Vivian's breathing had steadied now. 3 days before the wedding, I imagine Caleb wasn't pleased. Men like that don't handle rejection well. No, they don't. Outside, wind hammered the cabin. Inside, 2 damaged people lay in the dark, their shared confessions hanging in the air like smoke. Thank you, Vivian said after a while, for telling me about Sarah. Thank you for telling me about your mother. Does it get easier? The missing them? Gideon considered lying. Decided she deserved the truth. No, you just get better at carrying it. Another terrible answer. I'm full of those. This time when she laughed, it sounded almost genuine. The second day of the storm, they ran out of coffee. Gideon discovered this tragedy when he went to make his morning pot and found the tin empty. He stood there staring at it like the coffee might materialize through sheer force of will. Please tell me that's not what I think it is, Vivian said from the bed. Depends. Are you thinking we're out of coffee? Damn. Took the words right out of my mouth. They looked at each other across the cabin. For a moment, grief united them. Then Vivian started laughing, real laughter this time, the kind that bent her double and brought tears to her eyes. It's not funny, Gideon protested, but he could feel his own mouth twitching. It's absolutely funny. We're trapped on a mountain in a blizzard, and the worst thing that's happened is we ran out of coffee. When she put it that way, he supposed it was kind of funny. Could be worse, he admitted. How? Could be out of whiskey, too. Vivian's laughter intensified. Gideon found himself smiling, a real smile, the first in longer than he could remember. It felt strange on his face, like wearing boots that didn't quite fit, but not bad strange, just different. They settled for hot water with a little whiskey mixed in. It tasted terrible, but it was warm. Vivian made a face after the first sip. This is disgusting. Builds character. I have plenty of character, thank you. Could always use more. She threw a wadded-up sock at him. Gideon caught it easily, tossed it back. Vivian caught it too, looking surprised at herself. "Nice hands," Gideon observed. "I played catch with the neighbor boys when I was little. Drove father insane." She smiled at the memory. "He said young ladies didn't throw things, but mother encouraged it. Said women should know how to aim." Smart woman. She was. The day stretched out long and restless. They were both used to moving, working, staying busy. Being trapped inside made them edgy. Gideon tried to read but couldn't focus. Vivian paced the small space like a caged animal. Finally, she stopped in front of him. "Teach me something," she demanded. "Like what?" "I don't know. Something useful. Something I can do with my hands." Gideon thought about it. "Ever skin a rabbit?" "That's your idea of cabin entertainment." "I've got 3 from before the storm. Need to be dressed before they spoil." Vivian grimaced. "That sounds revolting." "It's useful. You wanted useful." "I was thinking more along the lines of, I don't know, cards or something." "Don't play cards." "Of course you don't." Vivian sighed. "Fine. Show me the rabbits." Gideon retrieved them from the cold cellar beneath the floor. He laid them out on the table along with his skinning knife. Vivian looked at the small, stiff bodies and went pale. "Having second thoughts?" Gideon asked. "No." She squared her shoulders. "Show me." He walked her through it step by step. How to make the initial cut. How to work the skin free without tearing the meat. How to separate the useful parts from the waste. Vivian's hands shook at first, and she had to stop twice to breathe through her nausea, but she didn't quit. By the 3rd rabbit, her cuts were cleaner, more confident. "Not bad," Gideon said. "High praise coming from you." "I don't give compliments I don't mean." Vivian wiped blood on her already ruined dress. "I'm covered in gore and freezing and drinking hot whiskey water because we're out of coffee. 6 weeks ago, I was attending tea parties in Boston." "Which life do you like better?" The question surprised them both. Vivian looked down at her raw, blistered hands, at the rabbit she'd just skinned, then at Gideon. "Ask me in a month," she said. That night she didn't wake screaming. The 3rd day, cabin fever set in hard. Gideon woke irritable and restless. Everything too small and too close. Vivian wasn't much better. They snapped at each other over breakfast, over nothing, tension crackling between them like static. "You don't have to hover," Vivian said when Gideon checked the fire for the 3rd time in an hour. "Not hovering, just making sure it doesn't die." "It's fine." "Didn't say it wasn't." "Then stop checking it." Gideon's jaw tightened. "It's my cabin. I'll check the fire if I want." "Your cabin. Your mountain. Your everything." Vivian slammed her book shut. "Must be nice owning the whole world." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." But the damage was done. They spent the rest of the morning in hostile silence, each occupying their own corner of the small space. By afternoon, Gideon couldn't take it anymore. He pulled on his coat. "Where are you going?" Vivian asked. "Out." "In this?" She gestured at the window where snow still fell thick. "Need air." "You'll freeze." "Maybe that's the point." He stepped onto the porch before she could argue. The cold hit him like a fist, but he welcomed it, better than the suffocating tension inside. Gideon stood there breathing frozen air, watching snow fall. Behind him, he heard the door open. "This is stupid," Vivian called over the wind. "You're being stupid. Go back inside." "Not until you do. I don't need you mothering me. And I don't need you sulking like a child because we're trapped together." She moved to stand beside him, arms wrapped around herself. "We're both going crazy in there. Fighting about it won't help." "Got a better idea?" "Actually, yes." She scooped up a handful of snow and threw it at his chest. Gideon stared at the white splatter on his coat. "Did you just—" Another snowball hit him in the shoulder. "Vivian!" A 3rd one caught him in the side of the head. Something in Gideon snapped, not in anger, but in release. He bent down, packed his own snowball, hurled it at her. It exploded against her shoulder and she yelped. "Oh, you're asking for it now," she shouted. What followed was less a snowball fight than controlled chaos. They pelted each other without mercy, laughing and cursing, slipping in the snow. Vivian's aim was deadly. Gideon's throws had more power. Neither gave quarter. Finally, Gideon caught her around the waist and they both went down in a drift. Vivian shrieked, struggling, but she was laughing too hard to put up much fight. They lay there gasping, covered in snow, breath clouding between them. "Truce?" Vivian managed. "Truce." They staggered back inside, half frozen, dripping melted snow everywhere. Gideon built up the fire while Vivian changed into dry clothes. When she emerged, her cheeks were flushed from cold and her hair stuck out in wild tangles. "Feel better?" she asked. "Yeah, you?" "Much." She paused. "I'm sorry for snapping at you. I'm sorry, too, for being an ass about it." "You weren't that much of an ass." "Liar." They smiled at each other. Tension dissolved. That evening, they played a game Vivian invented using stones from the hearth and ridiculous rules she made up as they went. Gideon won twice. Vivian won 3 times and insisted it was skill, not luck. "You're cheating," Gideon accused without heat. "Prove it." "Can't. You keep changing the rules." "That's strategy. That's cheating." Vivian grinned, unrepentant. "Sore loser." Later, after they'd eaten and the fire burned low, Vivian asked, "What do you do up here? When you're alone?" "Live? Survive." "No, I mean, for yourself, for enjoyment." Gideon frowned. "Don't really think about it." "You don't do anything just because you like it? Trapping, hunting, building things. Those are all work. Work I enjoy." Vivian shook her head. "That's sad." "How is it sad? I do what I need to do." "But you don't do anything you want to do. There's a difference." She leaned forward. "When was the last time you did something purely because it made you happy?" The question hit harder than it should have. Gideon tried to remember. Before Sarah died, he'd liked carving, making small figures from wood, but he'd put that away with everything else. "Been a while," he admitted. "That's what I thought." Vivian stood, crossed to the shelves, and returned with his whittling knife. She pressed it into his hand. "So do something now." "Like what?" "Whatever you want. Surprise yourself." Gideon looked at the knife, at her expectant face. Then he grabbed a piece of firewood and started carving. His hands remembered the motions even though years had passed. The knife moved almost on its own, shaving away thin curls of wood. Vivian watched in silence, tucked into the chair with her knees drawn up. An hour later, Gideon held a rough bird. Not perfect, one wing sat slightly crooked, but recognizable. "It's beautiful," Vivian said softly. "It's rough." "It's beautiful," she insisted. She took it carefully, turning it in the firelight. "What kind of bird?" "Sparrow." Sarah liked sparrows. Vivian's fingers traced the carved feathers. "Can I keep it?" The request surprised him. "Why would you want it?" "To remember this. All of this." She met his eyes. "In case I forget how it felt to be somewhere I wasn't afraid." Something in Gideon's chest cracked open. "Keep it," he said roughly. Vivian tucked the wooden bird into her pocket like treasure. On the 4th morning, Gideon woke to silence. Not the muffled quiet of falling snow. Real silence. The storm had passed. He dressed quickly and stepped outside. The sky had cleared to brilliant blue. Fresh snow covered everything in blinding white. The air held that crystal-sharp quality that only came after a major storm. It was beautiful, and it meant Vivian could leave soon. Gideon stood there feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. He should be relieved, should want his solitude back. Instead, all he could think was that the cabin would feel empty when she was gone. Behind him, the door opened. Vivian emerged, still in her nightgown, with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "It stopped," she observed. "Yeah." "How long before the snow settles enough to travel?" "Few days, maybe a week." She nodded slowly. Neither of them moved. "I should check the trap lines," Gideon said finally. "See what damage the storm did." "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I want to." So they went together, breaking trail through virgin snow. The forest had transformed into something from a dream. Ice crystals caught the sunlight and threw rainbows. Snow hung from branches in perfect sculptures. Everything silent and clean and new. They found most of the traps buried or damaged. Gideon reset what he could, marked the locations of others to fix later. Vivian helped without being asked, her movements confident now after weeks of practice. At the 3rd trap, they found a lynx. dead, frozen solid, caught by the leg. A big male, maybe 40 pounds. His spotted coat was thick and beautiful, even in death. Poor thing, Vivian said. Gideon knelt beside it. Suffered less than he would have starving. Cat probably hadn't eaten in days when he found the trap. Does that make it better? Makes it necessary. He freed the lynx and added it to his pack. The pelt would bring good money if he ever went back to Copper Falls. When he stood, Vivian was watching him with an odd expression. "What?" he asked. "Nothing. I'm just trying to figure you out." "Not much to figure." "I disagree." She tilted her head. "You're kind, but you pretend not to be. You care, but you act like you don't. You save people and then convince yourself it didn't mean anything." "That what you think?" "That's what I know." Vivian stepped closer. "You're not as alone as you pretend to be, Gideon Vance." "Maybe I want to be." "Want and need are different things." She held his gaze, standing there in snow up to her knees, wearing his too big coat and battered boots. Her cheeks were red from cold. Her hair had come loose from its braid. She looked nothing like the frightened woman he'd pulled from the ravine. She looked strong, certain, alive. And looking at her made Gideon's heart do things he'd thought it had forgotten how to do. "We should keep moving," he said roughly. "Got more line to check." Vivian nodded, but didn't look away. "Gideon." "What?" For a moment he thought she was going to say something important, something that would change everything. Instead, she just shook her head. "Nothing. Lead on." They finished the trap line in silence, but something had shifted between them. Something Gideon couldn't name and wasn't sure he wanted to. That night, Vivian cooked the rabbit stew. She'd learned his recipes, his methods. The food tasted exactly like something he would have made. Gideon found that both comforting and terrifying. "It's good," he said. "You sound surprised." "I am. Little." Vivian threw a piece of bread at him. "Ass." "Thought we established that already." They ate in comfortable silence. Afterward, Vivian washed the dishes while Gideon worked on the lynx pelt. The domestic routine felt natural. Right. That scared him more than any blizzard. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said, not turning from the dishes. "Depends." "Why haven't you gone back down? To town, I mean. In 4 years." Gideon's hands stilled on the pelt. "Nothing there for me." "Nothing? No friends? No supplies you need?" "I trade with a trapper who comes up twice a year, barter for what I can't make." He resumed scraping. "Don't need people for that." "Everyone needs people." "I don't." "Liar." The word hung there. Gideon set down his knife and turned to face her. "What do you want me to say, Vivian? That I'm lonely? That sometimes the silence gets so thick I can't breathe? That I talk to myself just to hear a human voice?" His jaw tightened. "Fine. You're right, but wanting people and needing them are different things. Wanting gets you hurt." Vivian dried her hands carefully. "What if it doesn't?" "It always does." "Not always." She crossed to stand in front of him, close enough he could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell the wood smoke in her hair. "I'm not Sarah," she said quietly. "I know that." "And you're not Caleb." "Never said I was." "Then why are we both so scared?" Gideon didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe he did and didn't want to admit it. "The snow will be settled in a few days," he said instead. "You can leave. Go west like you planned. Start over." "Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." They stood there, inches apart, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Gideon could feel his heart hammering, could see Vivian's pulse jumping in her throat. He should step back, put distance between them, protect what was left of the walls he'd built. Instead, he lifted his hand and touched her face. Vivian's breath caught. Her skin felt warm under his rough fingers. She didn't pull away, didn't move at all except to lean slightly into his touch. "This is a mistake," Gideon said. "Probably." "You should leave, soon as you can." "I know." "I've got nothing to offer you, no future, no promises." "I'm not asking for any." "Then what are you asking for?" Vivian's hand came up to cover his. "Maybe I'm not asking. Maybe I'm just here." Something in Gideon's chest broke open completely. All the walls, All the careful distance, all the years of practiced numbness, gone in an instant. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was desperate and hungry and full of 15 years of loneliness. Vivian kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. They broke apart, breathing hard. "We can't," Gideon said. "Why not?" "Because—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Because you'll leave? Because I'll lose you? Because I'm terrified?" All of it was true. None of it mattered. Vivian's fingers traced his jaw. "I've spent my whole life doing what I should, being who I was supposed to be. For once. Just once. I want to do something because I choose it. And you're choosing this. I'm choosing you." The words broke something in Gideon, or maybe fixed something. He wasn't sure which and didn't care. He kissed her again, slower this time. Vivian's arms wrapped around his neck. They stood there in the firelight, holding on to each other like drowning people who'd finally found shore. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian rested her forehead against his chest. Gideon could feel her trembling, or maybe that was him. "I'm still leaving," she whispered. "When the snow settles. I have to." The words hurt, but Gideon forced himself to nod. "I know. But until then, you're here. I'm here." They stood like that for a long time, neither wanting to let go. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and two people who'd been running for years finally stopped long enough to catch their breath. The next few days passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. They checked traps together, split wood together, cooked and cleaned and survived together. But now there were touches that lingered, looks that meant something, a tenderness that hadn't existed before. Gideon carved more small figures in the evenings while Vivian read aloud from his battered books. Her voice filled the cabin, drove back the silence he'd lived with for so long. Sometimes she'd stop reading and they'd just talk. About nothing, about everything, about dreams they'd buried and hopes they'd forgotten they had. "What would you do?" Vivian asked one night. "If you could go anywhere, be anyone." Gideon considered. "Never thought about it." "Think about it now." He stared into the fire. "Maybe build something. Not just a cabin. Something bigger. A lodge, maybe. Somewhere people could come experience the mountains without dying in them." "You'd hate that. All those people." "Maybe not all people. Just—" He stopped. "Just what?" "Just the ones worth keeping around." Vivian smiled. "And who decides which ones are worth it?" "I do. My mountain, remember?" She laughed and threw a carved chip of wood at him. Gideon caught it, added it to the fire. "What about you?" he asked. "California? Maybe. Or maybe somewhere smaller. A town where nobody knows who I'm supposed to be." Vivian's expression turned distant. "I'd open a bookshop or teach. Something quiet." "You don't seem like the quiet type." "I could be, if I wanted." "Could you, though?" "Watch me." They smiled at each other across the small room. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. "We're fools," Vivian said softly. "Why's that?" "Making plans. Pretending this can be something it's not." Gideon's chest tightened. "What is it then?" "I don't know." She met his eyes. "But it scares me how much I don't want it to end." "Me too." The honesty hung between them, raw and painful and true. That night, Vivian didn't sleep in the bed. She lay beside Gideon on the furs by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. They didn't speak, just breathed together in the darkness. And for the first time in 15 years, Gideon didn't dream about ghosts. 2 days later, he rode down the mountain to check the roads. The journey took most of the morning. The main trail had drifted badly, but was passable. Another week of good weather, and it would be clear enough for Vivian to make it down safely. Gideon should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt sick. He was almost back to the cabin when he saw them, tracks in the snow. Fresh. Multiple horses heading up toward Wolverine Peak. Every instinct Gideon had screamed danger. He spurred his horse forward, heart pounding. The tracks led straight to his cabin. As he got closer, he saw smoke. Too much smoke. And heard voices. Men's voices. Gideon dismounted 100 yards out and approached on foot, moving silent as a ghost. Through the trees he could see his cabin, 5 horses tied outside, the door standing open, and Vivian being dragged onto the porch by a man in an expensive coat. Rage exploded through Gideon's chest. He raised his rifle and stepped into the clearing. "Let her go." 5 heads swung toward him, 4 hired guns from the look of them. And the 5th, tall, handsome, dressed like money, could only be one person. Caleb Mercer smiled. "You must be the mountain man. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Gideon kept the rifle steady, aimed dead center at Caleb Mercer's chest. His finger rested on the trigger, light as a whisper. 30 feet separated them. At this distance, he wouldn't miss. "I said let her go." Caleb's smile didn't waver. He kept one hand wrapped around Vivian's upper arm, holding her like a piece of luggage. "Now why would I do that? I've come a very long way to retrieve my property." "She's not property." "Legally, she is, or will be in 3 days when we're married." Caleb's grip tightened. Vivian winced. "Her father signed the papers, very binding." "Don't care what her father signed." "Of course you don't. Men like you don't understand contracts, obligations." Caleb's voice dripped condescension. "But I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to compensate you for the trouble of sheltering Miss Ashcroft. Say, $50? Not for sale." "Everything's for sale, friend. You just haven't heard the right price." Gideon's jaw clenched. The 4 hired guns had spread out, hands near their weapons but not quite touching. Professionals. They knew better than to draw on a man already aiming at their boss. "Vivian," Gideon said quietly. "You hurt?" "No." Her voice shook but held steady. "They showed up an hour ago. I tried to—" "Shut up," Caleb snapped. He smiled at Gideon again. "See what I'm dealing with? Hysterical women. They need firm guidance." Something dark and violent moved through Gideon's chest. "Take your hand off her. Now." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Caleb laughed. "In front of 4 witnesses? That's murder, mountain man. They'd hang you." "Worth it." The laughter died. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Caleb's handsome face. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Silence stretched taut as wire. Snow began to fall again, light flurries drifting down through the pines. One of the hired guns shifted his weight, and Gideon's rifle swung toward him instantly. "Don't," Gideon warned. The man froze. "This is absurd," Caleb said. "Vivian, tell this savage to lower his weapon. You're coming home with me whether he likes it or not." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Vivian said. Caleb's fingers dug into her arm hard enough to bruise. "That's not your decision to make." "The hell it isn't." Vivian twisted suddenly, driving her elbow into Caleb's ribs with everything she had. It wasn't much, she weighed nothing compared to him. But surprise made him loosen his grip. Vivian yanked free and ran. Not toward Gideon, smart girl, but sideways toward the tree line. One of the hired guns moved to intercept her. Gideon's rifle cracked. Snow exploded 2 inches from the man's boot. Everyone froze. "Next one goes through your knee," Gideon said flatly. "Your choice." The hired gun backed off, hands raised. Vivian made it to the trees and kept running. Gideon could hear her crashing through the underbrush, putting distance between herself and Caleb. Good. Let her get clear. He could handle this mess alone. Caleb's face had gone red with rage. "You just made a very serious mistake." "Made plenty of those. Don't much care about one more." "You think you can hide her up here forever? I have resources. Men. Money." Caleb straightened his expensive coat. "I'll burn this entire mountain if I have to." "You're welcome to try." Brave words from a dead man. Caleb nodded to his hired guns. "Kill him." 4 hands dropped to 4 pistols. Gideon dove sideways as the first shot rang out. He hit the snow, rolled, came up firing. His bullet took the nearest man in the shoulder and spun him like a top. The others scattered, seeking cover behind trees and horses. Gideon scrambled behind the woodpile as bullets chewed splinters from the logs. He fired twice more, driving them back, then sprinted for the cabin. A bullet whined past his head close enough to feel the heat. He made it through the door and slammed it shut. Bullets punched through the wood, sending shafts of daylight stabbing across the dim interior. Gideon dropped below the window line and crawled to where he kept his spare ammunition. "This is pointless," Caleb's voice carried from outside. "Surrender now, and I'll make it quick." Gideon didn't waste breath answering. He reloaded methodically, fingers steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his veins. 4 men, minus the one he'd wounded. Maybe 3 effective shooters left. Plus Caleb, though Gideon doubted the bastard would risk his own skin. The firing stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire still burning in the hearth. "Gideon Vance!" Caleb shouted. "I know about you. I know about your dead wife and your dead baby. You think hiding up here makes you safe from loss? It doesn't. Everyone you care about dies. That's your curse." Gideon's hands tightened on the rifle. The words hit like fists, but he forced himself to breathe through it. Caleb was fishing, trying to provoke a mistake. "And now you've got Vivian," Caleb continued. "What happens when I take her from you? When I drag her back to Boston and make her my wife?" "You'll be alone again, mountain man. Just you and your ghosts." "Go to hell," Gideon muttered. A window shattered. Something heavy thudded onto the floor. Gideon saw it instantly, a burning branch from his own woodpile, wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. Fire. He stomped it out before it could catch, but 2 more came through different windows. The cabin filled with smoke. Flames licked at the furs piled in the corner. Gideon grabbed a blanket and beat at the fires, but they'd trapped him. Stay inside and burn. Go outside and get shot. Some choice. He chose the bullets. Gideon kicked the door open and came out firing. He caught one man reloading and put a round through his leg. The man went down screaming. Another fired back and wood exploded from the doorframe inches from Gideon's face. Then something hit him from the side. Vivian crashed into him, driving them both back into the cabin. "Are you insane?" she gasped. "What are you doing here? I told you to run. And leave you to die? Not happening. Vivian, where's the other rifle?" Gideon stared at her. She stood there in her ruined dress, face smudged with soot, eyes blazing with determination. "You can't. Where is it?" He pointed to the rack above the door. Vivian grabbed the rifle, checked the load with fumbling but determined hands. "I've never shot at a person before," she said. "Don't have to hit them. Just keep their heads down." "I can do that." Gideon wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in the cellar where she'd be safe. But there wasn't time, and they both knew it. He moved to the window. Vivian took up position at the shattered frame on the opposite wall. Through the smoke and falling snow, Gideon could see 2 men taking cover behind the horses. The third was dragging his wounded leg toward better shelter. Caleb stood well back, untouched and pristine in his fancy coat. "On 3, Gideon said. "We lay down fire, drive them away from the horses." Vivian nodded, jaw set. 1, 2, 3. They fired together. Gideon's shot scattered snow near the horses. Vivian's went wide but close enough to make the nearest man flinch. They reloaded and fired again, and again. The horses panicked, rearing and pulling at their ties. One broke free and bolted into the trees. The others followed, dragging the hitching post with them. "No!" Caleb screamed. "Get them back!" His men tried, but Gideon and Vivian kept firing. Within minutes, all 5 horses had scattered into the forest. The hired guns looked at each other, at their wounded companion, at the burning cabin, and the 2 crazy people shooting from inside it. One of them stood up, hands raised. "I didn't sign on for this," he called. "We're done." "I'm not paying you to quit," Caleb snarled. "You're not paying us enough to die." The man started walking toward the tree line. After a moment, the other followed, helping their wounded friend. They disappeared into the forest without looking back. Caleb stood alone in the clearing, face purple with rage. "Cowards! All of you!" Gideon stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "Just you now. This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." "She's mine," Caleb's voice cracked. "I paid for her. Her father—" "Doesn't matter what her father did. Vivian's not going with you." "She doesn't have a choice." "That's where you're wrong." Vivian appeared in the doorway beside Gideon. "I always had a choice. I just finally made it." Caleb looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "You can't possibly think with him? A filthy mountain savage who lives like an animal? Better an honest animal than a monster in expensive clothes." The words hit Caleb like a slap. His hand dropped to his waist where a pistol hung. Gideon's rifle came up instantly. "Don't," Gideon warned. For a long moment they stood frozen. Then Caleb's hand fell away from the weapon. His face twisted into something ugly. "You'll regret this," he said to Vivian. "Both of you. I'll make sure of it." Get off my mountain, Gideon said quietly, while you still can. Caleb looked like he wanted to say more. Instead, he turned and stalked toward the trees where his hired guns had disappeared. His expensive boots slipped on the snow. He nearly fell, caught himself, and kept walking without looking back. They watched until he vanished into the forest. Gideon lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking. You all right? I think so. Vivian's voice came out thin. Is he really gone? For now. She nodded, then her knees buckled. Gideon caught her before she hit the ground. She wasn't unconscious, just shaking so hard her legs wouldn't hold her. He half carried her to the chair by the fire and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Breathe, he said. Just breathe. Vivian gulped air like she'd forgotten how. Tears streaked through the soot on her face. I thought they were going to kill you. Takes more than 5 soft city boys to put me down. Don't joke, I'm serious. When you came around that corner and he had me, her voice broke. I was so scared. Gideon knelt in front of her. Hey, look at me. She raised her eyes to his. You're safe, he said. I won't let him take you. You can't promise that. Yeah, I can. He comes back, I'll kill him. Simple as that. Vivian started to laugh, then couldn't stop. It came out half hysterical, edged with shock. Gideon let her ride it out, one hand on her knee, keeping her grounded. When the laughter finally died, Vivian wiped her eyes. I shot at people. You did good. I was terrible, couldn't hit anything. Didn't need to hit them, just needed to scare them, that you did. Gideon squeezed her knee. You're braver than you think. I'm not brave, I'm terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, means you do it anyway. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and kissed him hard. When she pulled back, her eyes were fierce. Thank you, she said, for choosing me over your peace. Wasn't much of a choice. It was everything. Gideon didn't know what to say to that, so he just held her while the fire burned down and snow fell outside, and somewhere in the forest, Caleb Mercer stumbled through the wilderness without horses or supplies or hope. The cabin was a disaster. 2 windows shattered, bullet holes in the walls, scorch marks on the floor where the fire had caught, half the furs ruined, the table overturned, supplies scattered everywhere. Gideon and Vivian spent the rest of the day cleaning up. They boarded the windows with split logs, swept up broken glass, salvaged what they could, and threw out what they couldn't. As the sun set, they sat exhausted by the fire. He'll be back, Vivian said quietly. I know. Probably with more men, better men. Probably. She turned to look at him. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed out of it. Let him take me. That what you wanted? Of course not, but it would have been easier for you. Gideon poked at the fire with a stick. Maybe I'm tired of easy. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Vivian studied his face in the firelight. You're a terrible liar, you know that. Not lying. Then what aren't you saying? Gideon set down the stick, looked at her directly. You remember what you asked me? About why I saved you? You said you didn't know. I lied. He took a breath. I saved you because when I found you in that snow, half dead, I saw myself. Not the me I've been for 15 years, the me I was before, the one who gave a damn, who still believed in something besides survival. Vivian's eyes had gone soft, and these past weeks, Gideon continued, watching you learn to split wood and skin rabbits and shoot straight, watching you refuse to quit or break or become what he tried to make you. He stopped, swallowed hard. You reminded me who I used to be, made me want to be that person again. Gideon. So when that bastard showed up and put his hands on you, I didn't think about it. Just knew I'd burn the whole world down before I let him take you. He met her eyes. That answer your question? Vivian's hand found his. I love you. The words hit him like lightning. Gideon stared at her, speechless. I know it's fast, Vivian said quickly. I know it's crazy. We barely know each other, and this whole situation is insane, and you probably don't feel the same way. I love you too. Now it was her turn to stare. Didn't want to, Gideon admitted. Fought it hard as I could. But somewhere between teaching you to trap and watching you beat me at your ridiculous stone game and holding you by the fire, he shook his head, stopped being able to imagine this cabin without you in it. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks. So what do we do? Don't know. Never been good at the future. Me neither. They sat there holding hands, two people who'd spent years running from pain, finally facing it together. I can't go back to Boston, Vivian said finally. Even if Caleb gives up, which he won't, my father will never forgive me. I've ruined everything. Maybe some things need ruining. And I can't stay here forever. You know that. When spring comes, when the snow melts, people will find out. Caleb will make sure of it. He'll tell everyone you kidnapped me, corrupted me. They'll come for you. Gideon had already thought of that. Then we don't stay here. What? We leave. Together. Head west like you planned. The idea was forming as he spoke. I've got money saved, furs I can trade. We go to California or Oregon. Somewhere Caleb Mercer's name doesn't mean anything. You'd leave your mountain? It's just a mountain. He stopped, the truth too big to finish. But Vivian understood anyway. We'd have to travel carefully. Stay off main roads. He'll have people looking. I know the trails. The places nobody goes. Gideon squeezed her hand. I can keep you safe. I know you can, but... She hesitated. Are you sure? This is your home. Your life. I don't want you to resent me later. This stopped being a life years ago, just existing, going through the motions. Gideon touched her face. You made me feel alive again. That's worth more than any mountain. Vivian kissed him, soft and slow. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. Okay, she said. Okay, we'll run together. When the snow melts, another month maybe. A month? Vivian glanced at the boarded windows. Think we can survive that long? We survived the blizzard. We survived Caleb. We can survive anything. Awful confident all of a sudden. That's what happens when you've got something to lose. Gideon stood and pulled her to her feet. Come on, we should eat. Long day tomorrow. Doing what? Preparing. If Caleb comes back, we need to be ready. They made dinner together, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over weeks of living in close quarters. Vivian fried the venison while Gideon made coffee, real coffee, from the supplies Caleb's men had abandoned when they fled. Small mercy. As they ate, Gideon outlined his plan. They'd reinforce the cabin, set traps around the perimeter, stockpile ammunition. He'd teach Vivian to shoot properly, not just panic fire. They'd prepare escape routes, cache supplies at strategic points down the mountain. You've done this before, Vivian observed. Done what? Planned for a siege, Gideon shrugged. The war taught me things. You fought? 3 years. Infantry. He didn't elaborate. Didn't mention the things he'd seen, the things he'd done. Some memories were better left buried, but Vivian heard what he wasn't saying. Is that where you got the scar? On your ribs? Gideon's hand went automatically to the old wound. Gettysburg. Bayonet. My mother had a cousin who died there. A lot of people died there. They fell quiet. The war had ended 14 years ago, but its ghost still walked. Gideon suspected they always would. After dinner, Vivian curled up in the chair while Gideon cleaned their weapons. He worked methodically, checking each piece, making sure everything functioned smoothly. Vivian watched him with sleepy eyes. Tell me about her, she said after a while. Gideon looked up. Who? Sarah, your wife. He started to deflect, then stopped. If they were going to build something together, a future, a life, she deserved to know the whole truth. We met when I was 22, Gideon said slowly. Right after I came back from the war. She was working in her father's general store in Copper Falls. Red hair, quick smile, laughed at my terrible jokes. Vivian smiled. You tell jokes? Used to, long time ago. Gideon ran an oiled cloth along the rifle barrel. We got married 6 months later. Her father gave us land in the valley. I built us a cabin, started farming. It was... He paused, searching for the word. Simple. Good. What happened? Winter of '64, Sarah got pregnant. We were so happy. The memory hurt, but Gideon pushed through. Everything seemed fine until the 8th month. Then she started getting sick, weak. The baby came early, too early. His hands had stopped moving. He stared at the rifle without seeing it. The baby, a boy, he never breathed, just... Gideon's voice cracked. Just lay there, silent. And Sarah, She was bleeding so bad. I rode for the doctor, but the snow was thick, and by the time we got back— You don't have to finish, Vivian said softly. Yeah, I do. Gideon forced himself to continue. She died holding my hand. Last thing she said was that she was sorry. Like it was her fault. He laughed bitterly. I should have protected her, should have gotten help sooner, should have done something. It wasn't your fault. Doesn't matter. They were my responsibility and they died. Gideon set down the rifle. So I burned the cabin, took what I could carry, and came up here. Figured if I didn't let anyone close, they couldn't die on me. That's not living. That's hiding. I know that now. Vivian uncurled from the chair and moved to sit beside him on the floor. She took his scarred hands in hers. I had a miscarriage, she said quietly. Gideon's head snapped up. What? 2 years ago. I was 19. There was a boy, a merchant's son. Father didn't approve, so we kept it secret. Vivian's thumbs traced circles on his palms. I got pregnant, scared out of my mind. Before I could figure out what to do, I lost it. Just woke up bleeding one morning. I'm sorry. The boy ran. Didn't want the scandal. Father never knew. I dealt with it alone. She met Gideon's eyes. For a long time, I thought maybe it was better that way, that I wasn't ready to be a mother. But sometimes I wonder what they would have been like. They? The baby, boy or girl, what color eyes? Whose smile? Vivian's voice stayed steady, but tears tracked down her face. I named them anyway, in my head. Called them Elizabeth if it was a girl, James if it was a boy. Gideon pulled her close. She tucked her head under his chin, and they sat like that, two people holding on to the ghosts of children they'd never meet. We're quite a pair, Vivian murmured against his chest. That we are. Broken people trying to fix each other? Is that what we're doing? She pulled back to look at him. I don't know. Maybe we're just trying not to be so broken anymore. Gideon tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Think it's working? Ask me tomorrow. They stayed on the floor by the fire, wrapped around each other, sharing warmth and silence and understanding. Outside, wind picked up again. More snow coming. But inside the damaged cabin, two people who'd lost everything began to believe they might have found something worth keeping. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Gideon woke with Vivian still in his arms, her breath warm against his neck. For a moment he just lay there, memorizing the weight of her, the smell of wood smoke in her hair, the way she fit against him like she'd been designed for that exact spot. Then reality crashed back. Caleb was still out there, probably halfway to Copper Falls by now, organizing another attempt. This time he'd bring real guns, professional killers, men who wouldn't break and run when things got hard. They had maybe a week, 2 if they were lucky. Gideon eased away from Vivian and stood. His back protested. Too many nights on hard floors. He was getting old for this. 37 wasn't ancient, but it wasn't young either, and the life he'd lived had been hard on his body. He built up the fire and put coffee on. Vivian stirred, blinked awake, smiled when she saw him watching. Morning, she said. Morning. How long was I out? Couple hours. She sat up, wincing. I hurt everywhere. Yesterday was rough. That's putting it mildly. Vivian stretched, joints popping. So what's the plan? We fortify. Make this place as defensible as possible. You really think he'll come back? I know he will. Men like Caleb don't quit. Gideon poured coffee and handed her a cup. We need to be ready. They spent the day working. Gideon reinforced the door with extra beams. They moved the heavy furniture to create barriers, positioned weapons at strategic points around the cabin. Gideon showed Vivian how to load and fire both rifles and his pistol, making her practice until the motions became automatic. Again, he said as she fumbled with the powder. I've done it 10 times. Do it 10 more, needs to be muscle memory. You won't have time to think when it matters. Vivian scowled but repeated the process. By the 20th attempt, her hands moved smooth and sure. Good, Gideon approved. Now shooting. They set up targets in the clearing, chunks of wood balanced on stumps. Vivian's first few shots went wide. Then she started adjusting, compensating for the rifle's kick, learning to breathe through the recoil. Her 6th shot hit the target dead center. Ha! She turned to Gideon, face lit with triumph. Did you see that? Hard to miss. Admit it. I'm good. You're adequate. She threw a snowball at him. Gideon dodged, grinning despite himself. It felt good to smile, to joke, to pretend for a moment that they weren't preparing for war. But the moment passed. Reality settled back in like the cold. By evening, the cabin looked like a fortress. Gideon felt better about their chances, but not good. If Caleb brought enough men, all the preparation in the world wouldn't matter. They'd be overrun. We could leave now, Vivian said over dinner. Tonight. In the dark. Get a head start. Gideon had considered it. Snow's still too deep. We'd never make it off the mountain before they caught us. So we wait. We wait. And if they come before the snow melts? Then we fight. Vivian set down her fork. I don't want you to die for me. Not planning on dying. Gideon, I mean it. He reached across the table and took her hand. We're both walking out of this, together, to California or hell or wherever we decide. But we're doing it together. She squeezed his fingers. Promise me. I promise. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but sometimes you made promises anyway. That night, they lay together by the fire again. Vivian traced the scars on Gideon's chest, the old bayonet wound, the marks from a grizzly that had gotten too close 5 years back, the puckered bullet hole in his shoulder from a claim jumper who'd thought him an easy target. You're like a map, she murmured. Every scar a different story. Most aren't worth telling. Tell me anyway. So he did. Not all of them. Some cuts went too deep, but enough. The war. The wilderness. The years of surviving alone. And Vivian told him hers in return. The small scars of a sheltered life. A fall from a horse at 15. A burn from an iron at 17. The mark on her palm from when she'd grabbed broken glass trying to save her mother's favorite vase. Different lives, different wounds, but somehow fitting together anyway. What do you think happens? Vivian asked. After. If we make it. When we make it. All right, when? She propped herself on one elbow. What do we do? Where do we go? Gideon thought about it. Somewhere warm. I'm tired of winter. Somewhere with people, but not too many people. Somewhere nobody knows our names. Somewhere we can start over. Yeah, Gideon agreed. Somewhere like that. Vivian smiled. Sounds perfect. Probably won't be. Probably not. But we'll make it work. They fell quiet, imagining a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. Outside, the wind died down. Stars emerged, bright and cold against the black sky. And on a mountain in Montana, two people held on to each other and hoped like hell they'd live long enough to see that future come true. They came 6 days later, at dawn. Gideon woke to the sound that didn't belong. The creak of leather, the soft jingle of bridle bits, the muffled crunch of snow under careful feet. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, rifle in hand. Vivian. He shook her shoulder. Wake up. They're here. She came awake instantly. No grogginess, just sharp focus. The past week had changed her, hardened her. She grabbed the second rifle without being told and moved to the window they'd reinforced with heavy shutters. How many? She whispered. Gideon peered through a gap in the boards. Gray dawn light filtered through the pines. He counted shadows moving between the trees. 8. No. 9. Professional this time, spreading out, establishing a perimeter, moving with military precision. 9 that I can see. Maybe more. That's a lot of men for one woman. Caleb doesn't do things halfway. Gideon checked his ammunition. 30 rounds for the rifle, another 20 for the pistol. Not enough if this turned into a prolonged fight. Stay low. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. What about you? I'm going to talk to them. That's insane. Maybe, but if we can avoid a fight, we can't. Vivian's voice was flat. You know that. Caleb didn't bring 9 men to negotiate. She was right, but Gideon had to try anyway. He moved to the door, cracked it open an inch. Mercer, I know you're out there. Silence. Then Caleb's voice, closer than Gideon expected, maybe 30 yards out. Good morning, Mr. Vance. I trust you've had time to reconsider your position. My position hasn't changed. Pity. I brought friends this time. Professional friends. Men who won't run at the first sign of resistance. Caleb's tone was almost cheerful. I'm offering you one chance. Send Vivian out and you live. Refuse and my men will dig you out of that cabin like a tick. She's not going anywhere. Then you're a fool. Been called worse. A pause. Then Caleb said, You have 5 minutes to surrender. After that, we're coming in. And Mr. Vance, my instructions are to take Vivian alive. You, I don't care about. Think on that. Gideon shut the door and turned to find Vivian watching him with eyes that had gone very old, very fast. Well, she said, that's that. We can still run, out the back, through the trees. They'll have men positioned. You said yourself they're professionals. Vivian checked her rifle with steady hands. We fight here or we die running. At least here we have cover. Gideon wanted to argue, wanted to grab her and force her out the back window and damn the consequences. But she was right, and they both knew it. All right, he said. We make our stand. They took up positions on opposite sides of the cabin, covering different angles. Gideon had mapped out every sight line during the past week, knew exactly where the attackers would have to expose themselves. The 5 minutes crawled past like hours. Then a voice Gideon didn't recognize shouted, Time's up! The first bullet punched through the door, splintering wood. Then another, and another, a sustained barrage that turned the cabin's entrance into Swiss cheese. Gideon and Vivian stayed below the window line, waiting. The shooting stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, Gideon heard footsteps, someone rushing the door. He rose and fired through a gap in the boards. The running man went down screaming, clutching his thigh. 2 others dragged him back into the trees. First blood, Vivian muttered. More gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Bullets hammered the cabin from 3 sides. Wood chips flew. The reinforced shutters held, but barely. Gideon fired back, methodical, conserving ammunition. Each shot counted. He caught glimpses of movement between trees, fired at shadows, heard a curse that suggested he'd hit something. Beside him, Vivian's rifle cracked. Once, twice. She was getting better, learning to lead moving targets. There, she said. Behind the big pine. Gideon looked. Saw a man in a heavy coat taking aim. Gideon fired first. The man jerked backward and disappeared. Got him, Gideon confirmed. How many is that? 2 down, 7 left, plus Caleb. Those aren't good odds. We've had worse. When? Last week. There were more of them then. Vivian laughed, sharp and a little wild. You're insane. Little bit. The assault continued. Caleb's men were smart. They didn't rush, didn't expose themselves unnecessarily, just kept up steady pressure, wearing down the defenders, testing for weak points. An hour passed. Then 2. The cabin filled with gun smoke and the acrid smell of black powder. Gideon's shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. His ears rang from the constant explosions. During a lull, Vivian asked, How much ammunition do we have left? Gideon did the math. Maybe 20 rounds. You? 15. Not enough. Not nearly enough. We need to make them commit, Gideon said. Draw them into a rush. How? Make them think we're out of ammunition. Stop shooting. Wait for them to get brave. It was risky. If they rushed from multiple directions simultaneously, Gideon and Vivian would be overwhelmed. But sitting here trading shots would just delay the inevitable. All right, Vivian agreed. Let's do it. They stopped firing. The silence felt enormous after hours of gunfire. From outside, Caleb's voice called, Running low on bullets, are we? Gideon didn't answer. I can wait all day, Caleb continued. All week. Eventually you'll have to come out. Still silence. Gideon watched through the gaps, waiting. Come on, he thought. Take the bait. Minutes ticked by. Then he saw movement. 2 men emerging from cover, advancing on the cabin with weapons ready. They moved well, covering each other, staying low. Gideon let them get close. Closer. 20 yards. 15. Now, he whispered. He and Vivian rose together and fired. Both men went down hard. One didn't move. The other crawled back toward the trees, leaving a blood trail in the snow. Immediately, answering fire erupted from the forest. But it was wild, panicked. The attackers hadn't expected resistance. Gideon smiled grimly. That got their attention. 5 left. Vivian said, not counting Caleb. Not counting Caleb, Gideon agreed. But now they were down to maybe a dozen rounds total, and Caleb's remaining men would be more cautious, less willing to expose themselves. The standoff stretched into afternoon. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow-covered clearing into a blinding white field. Gideon's eyes ached from the glare. Then something changed. The shooting stopped completely. No movement in the trees, no voices, just eerie silence broken only by the whisper of wind through pines. "What are they doing?" Vivian asked. Gideon didn't know. He scanned the tree line, looking for... There, smoke. Thin gray tendrils rising from multiple points around the clearing. "Fire," he said. "They're going to burn us out." Vivian's face went pale. "What do we do?" Gideon thought fast. The cabin was solid logs. It wouldn't catch easily. But if they surrounded it with enough flame, the heat and smoke would force them outside. Right into waiting guns. "We go now," he decided, "before the fire spreads. Out the back window, into the trees. Move fast and low. They won't expect us to run toward them." "That's your plan? Run at armed men?" "You got a better one?" She didn't. Gideon grabbed the pistol, checked the load. 6 rounds. He handed Vivian the rifle with its remaining bullets and kept the pistol for himself. "When we go, don't stop for anything. Head for that cluster of rocks about 50 yards out. We can ford up there. Make them come to us." Vivian nodded. Her hands shook, but her jaw was set. "Together?" "Together." Gideon pried boards off the back window. Smoke was already creeping under the door, thick and choking. He boosted Vivian through first, then followed, hitting the snow in a roll. Gunfire erupted immediately. Bullets kicked up snow all around them. Gideon fired back blind, just laying down cover while they ran. Vivian sprinted ahead, surprisingly fast, zigzagging between trees. A man stepped out from behind a pine, rifle raised. Gideon shot him in the chest without breaking stride. The man folded like paper. 4 left. They made it to the rocks and dove behind them. Bullets ricocheted off stone, whining into the forest. Gideon risked a look. He could see 2 men advancing from the left, another from the right. Where was the 4th? Then Vivian screamed. Gideon spun. A huge man had come from behind the rocks, must have been lying in wait. He had Vivian around the waist, one massive arm pinning her rifle to her side. Gideon raised the pistol, but couldn't get a clear shot. They were too tangled together. The big man grinned. "Drop it or I break her." Vivian drove her head backward into his nose. Cartilage crunched. The man's grip loosened just enough. Vivian tore free, and Gideon fired. The big man staggered, looked down at the red bloom spreading across his shirt, and fell. 3 left. "You all right?" Gideon asked. "No," Vivian's voice shook. "But I'm alive." The remaining men had gone to ground. Gideon could feel them out there, circling, looking for an opening. He checked his ammunition. 3 bullets left in the pistol. Vivian had maybe 5 in the rifle. 8 shots. 3 men, plus Caleb somewhere. The math didn't work. "Gideon," Vivian said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." "Save it. We're getting out of this." "No, listen." She turned to face him. "If this goes bad, if they take me, they won't. If they do," she continued firmly, "don't follow. Don't try to rescue me. Just go. Live. Please." "That's not happening. Promise me." "No." "Gideon." "I said no." He gripped her shoulder. "We walk out together or not at all. That's the deal." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "You stubborn ass." Takes one to know one. Despite everything, she smiled. Then Caleb's voice cut through the trees. Touching, really, but pointless. Gideon's head snapped up. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, immaculate in his expensive coat despite hours in the wilderness. He held a pistol loosely in one hand. "You've killed 6 of my men," Caleb said conversationally. "That's expensive, inconvenient, but ultimately meaningless. You can't win this." "Watch me," Gideon called back. "With 3 bullets? I can count, Mountain Man. So can my remaining associates." Caleb gestured. 2 men emerged from the trees, weapons trained on the rocks. "You're done. The only question is whether you die here or walk away." "What's the catch?" "Give me Vivian, right now, and you live. I'll even pay you for your trouble. Say $200? Gideon laughed. Go to hell. Your funeral. Caleb raised his pistol, aiming at the rocks. Last chance, Vivian. Come out or watch him die. Gideon felt Vivian shift beside him, starting to rise. He grabbed her arm. Don't. I have to. He'll kill you. He's going to kill me anyway. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. Men like Caleb don't leave witnesses. Gideon pulled her down beside him. We finish this together. How? We're outnumbered and nearly out of bullets. I know. Gideon's mind raced, looking for an angle, any angle. His eyes fell on the cabin. Smoke poured from the windows now, thick and black. Flames licked at the roof. An idea formed. Desperate. Probably suicidal. But better than surrender. Can you shoot that? He pointed at a burning timber that had fallen across the cabin's entrance. Vivian looked. I think so. Why? Because when you do, I'm going to run at those two men. They'll focus on me. You shoot Caleb. That's insane. Got a better plan? She didn't. On 3, Gideon said. 1? Wait. Vivian grabbed his face and kissed him hard. I love you. Love you too. 2, Gideon said. Vivian raised the rifle, sighting on the burning timber. 3. She fired. The timber exploded in a shower of sparks and burning wood. Smoke billowed out, creating a thick gray screen across the clearing. Gideon ran. He burst from behind the rocks, firing. His first shot caught one of Caleb's men in the shoulder. His second went wide, but close enough to make the other dive for cover. Behind him, Vivian's rifle cracked. Gideon didn't look back. He charged through the smoke, nearly blind, trusting instinct and luck. A bullet whined past his head. Another struck the ground at his feet. Then he was on them. The wounded man tried to bring his rifle up. Gideon batted it aside and fired point blank. The man dropped. The second man came at him with a knife. Gideon blocked the first slash, countered with the pistol, pulling the trigger. Click. Empty. The knife came at him again. Gideon threw the useless pistol at the man's face, buying a second, then lunged forward and drove his shoulder into the man's gut. They went down in a tangle of limbs and desperation. The man was younger, faster, but Gideon was meaner. He fought like the wars had taught him. Dirty, brutal, no rules, fingers and eyes, knee to groin, teeth on anything soft. The knife clattered away. Gideon got his hands around the man's throat and squeezed. The man bucked and thrashed, landing a punch to Gideon's ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Gideon squeezed harder. The thrashing slowed, stopped. Gideon rolled off the dead man, gasping. His ribs screamed. His knuckles were split and bleeding. But he was alive. Then he remembered Vivian. He stumbled to his feet, searching the smoke-filled clearing. Vivian! Here! She emerged from the haze, rifle still in her hands. Blood streaked her face, but she was standing. You hit? Gideon asked. No, you? I'll live. Caleb? Vivian pointed. Through the thinning smoke, Gideon saw Caleb Mercer on his knees in the snow. A red stain spread across his left side, just above the hip. His pistol lay several feet away. Gideon and Vivian approached slowly, weapons ready. Caleb looked up at them with hatred burning in his eyes. You shot me, he said to Vivian. Disbelief colored his voice. Yes. Vivian's hands were steady on the rifle. I did. You're mine. You belong to me. No? Vivian stepped closer, aiming the rifle at his chest. I belong to myself. I always did. You just never bothered to notice. Caleb tried to rise. His leg buckled and he fell back into the snow. This isn't over. My family, my connections, they'll find you, hunt you down. You can't hide forever. Maybe not, Gideon said, but we can try. He picked up Caleb's pistol and tucked it in his belt. Then he grabbed Caleb by the collar and dragged him toward a tree. What are you doing? Caleb demanded. Making sure you don't follow us. Gideon pulled off Caleb's expensive coat and used it to bind him to the trunk. The man yelped as the movement jarred his wound. Someone will find you, Gideon said. Eventually, or they won't. Either way, you're not my problem anymore. You can't just leave me here. Watch me. Caleb's face twisted with rage. I'll tell everyone, the law, the newspapers, everyone. You kidnapped her, corrupted her. They'll hang you for this. Gideon leaned close. Then you better hope someone finds you fast. Because if I hear you're spreading lies about her, I'll come back. And next time, I won't be so merciful. He straightened and turned away. Vivian stood there watching, her expression unreadable. "Ready?" Gideon asked. She looked at Caleb one last time. The man who'd tried to own her, who'd bought her like property and hunted her across the wilderness, who'd killed 6 men trying to drag her back into a cage. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They walked away from him, from the burning cabin, from the bodies scattered across the snow-covered clearing. Behind them, Caleb screamed threats and curses until his voice went hoarse. They kept walking. By the time they reached the tree line, the screaming had stopped. Gideon didn't look back. They moved through the forest in silence, putting distance between themselves and the carnage. Gideon led them along game trails he knew, paths that wouldn't show up on any map. His body ached. His ribs throbbed with each breath, but he pushed on. Beside him, Vivian walked with her head high, the rifle still in her hands. She'd washed the blood from her face in a snowbank, but her dress was ruined, torn and stained beyond repair. She looked like she'd been through hell. She looked beautiful. After an hour, they stopped to rest in a small hollow protected from the wind. Gideon checked Vivian over carefully, looking for injuries she might not have noticed in the heat of battle. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Let me look anyway." A few bruises, scraped knuckles, nothing serious. Gideon felt relief wash through him. "What about you?" Vivian asked. "Cracked rib, maybe. Nothing I haven't dealt with before. You should let me wrap it. Later, we need to keep moving." "Where are we going?" "Good question. The cabin was gone. Caleb might be rescued. His family would send more men." "South," Gideon decided. "Down the mountain. I've got supplies cached at a few spots. We can gather what we need, then head for the pass before it snows again." "And after the pass?" "West. Like we planned." Vivian nodded slowly. "We're really doing this, running away together. Unless you've changed your mind." "Have you?" Gideon took her hands. They were cold and rough, nothing like the soft hands of the woman he'd pulled from the snow weeks ago. "No," he said. "I haven't changed my mind." "Good." Vivian squeezed his fingers. "Because I meant what I said. I love you. Even after all this, the fighting, the killing, especially after all this." She pulled him close. "You could have walked away a dozen times. Let Caleb take me. Saved yourself. But you didn't." "Couldn't. I know." She kissed him softly. "That's why I love you." They held each other in the hollow while snow began to fall again, light flurries that wouldn't amount to much. Around them, the forest stood silent and watchful. "We should go," Gideon said finally. "Want to make it to the first cache before dark." They gathered their weapons and started walking again. The trail wound down through thick pines, following a creek that had frozen solid. Gideon knew this path. He'd walked it 100 times over the years, usually alone, usually with nothing but his thoughts for company. Now Vivian walked beside him, and the silence didn't feel lonely anymore. As the sun sank toward the western peaks, they reached a small cave Gideon had used before. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden under rocks, he'd stashed supplies: dried meat, coffee, ammunition, a spare coat. "You've been planning this for a while," Vivian observed. "Always good to have a way out." "Did you ever think you'd actually use it?" Gideon considered. "No, figured I'd die on that mountain." "What changed?" "You did." They made camp in the cave's mouth, building a small fire that wouldn't be visible from a distance. Gideon cooked the dried meat with melted snow and some wild onions he'd found. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filling. After they'd eaten, Vivian moved close to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you think they'll really come after us?" she asked. "Probably." "How long do we have?" "Depends. If Caleb doesn't make it, his family might give up. If he does," Gideon shrugged. "Could be weeks, could be months. But they'll come eventually. So we keep running. For a while. Until we get far enough that it doesn't matter anymore." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not afraid anymore." "No, I was. For so long. Afraid of Caleb, afraid of my father, afraid of what people would think." She lifted her head to look at him. "But you know what I realized today? When I shot him?" "What?" "That I'm stronger than I thought, that I don't need anyone's permission to live my life." She smiled. "You taught me that." Pretty sure you taught yourself. Maybe, but you showed me it was possible. Gideon tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. We make a good team. Yeah, we do. They sat together watching the fire burn down to coals. Outside, full darkness had fallen. Stars emerged, bright and cold. What happens now? Vivian asked. Now we rest. Tomorrow we head for the pass. Then California. Oregon. Wherever we want. Somewhere warm. Somewhere warm, Gideon agreed. Somewhere nobody knows our names. Somewhere we can start over. Vivian leaned into him. Sounds perfect. Probably won't be. I know, but we'll make it work. Yeah, Gideon said, wrapping his arm around her. We will. They fell asleep like that, curled together in the cave mouth, two people who'd been running for years finally heading toward something instead of away from it. And on the mountain behind them, in a clearing full of bodies and ashes, the snow fell and covered everything, erasing the evidence of the siege, burying the past, making the world clean and white and new again. They walked for 3 days before reaching the pass. The journey tested everything they had. Gideon's ribs screamed with each breath, making him slower than he wanted to be. Vivian's feet blistered in boots never meant for this kind of travel. They slept in caves and under pine branches, ate sparingly from Gideon's cached supplies, and kept watch through the long nights for any sign of pursuit. None came. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a ridge and saw the valley spread out below them. Beyond it, the mountains continued west, range after range fading into blue distance. But the worst was behind them. The pass ahead would take them down into warmer country, away from the snow and the ghosts. Vivian stood beside Gideon, breathing hard from the climb. That's it? We're through? Almost. Another day to the valley floor, then we're clear. She nodded but didn't move, just stood there looking back the way they'd come, her expression complicated. What are you thinking? Gideon asked. That I should hate it. That mountain. Everything that happened there. Vivian turned to him. But I don't. Isn't that strange? Why would you hate it? Because it almost killed me. Because it's where Caleb found me. Because leaving it means I can never go back. You want to go back? No, that's just it. She smiled sadly. I don't want to go back. But that mountain, that cabin, that's where I stopped being afraid. That's where I learned I could survive anything, fight for myself, choose my own life. She touched Gideon's face. That's where I found you. Gideon covered her hand with his. Me too. That's where I found me. The person I used to be, before I stopped caring about anything. We saved each other. Yeah, I guess we did. They stood together on the ridge while the wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and freedom. Below them, the world waited. New country, new possibilities, new mistakes to make and lessons to learn, but they'd make them together. Come on, Gideon said. We should keep moving while there's light. They descended into the valley as the sun painted the western peaks gold and crimson. By the time they reached the valley floor, full darkness had fallen. They made camp beside a stream that hadn't frozen yet, the sound of running water strange and musical after months of silence. Gideon caught fish with his bare hands while Vivian built the fire. They worked in comfortable rhythm, no words needed. The fish cooked quickly, flesh white and flaky. It tasted like hope. After they'd eaten, Vivian stripped off her boots and soaked her blistered feet in the cold stream. She hissed at the initial shock but didn't pull them out. Better? Gideon asked. Getting there. These boots are terrible. We'll get you new ones. First town we hit. Which is where exactly? Little place called Kenton, maybe 2 days west. Big enough to get supplies, small enough nobody asks questions. Vivian dried her feet and pulled the boots back on with a grimace. And after Kenton? We keep going, stay ahead of winter. Maybe make Sacramento by spring. Sacramento. She tested the word. I've never been to California. Me neither. What if it's awful? Then we go somewhere else. Just like that? Just like that? Gideon poked at the fire. No more running from things, just running toward them, toward whatever we want. I like the sound of that. They sat in silence for a while, watching sparks rise toward the stars. Then Vivian said, Tell me something true. Something you've never told anyone. Gideon considered. So many things he'd never said, never let himself say. I was scared, he said finally. Every day of the war, every single day. Men would charge into battle screaming like they weren't afraid of dying, but I was. Terrified. I just couldn't let anyone see it. Did anyone know? Sarah did, after I came home. I'd wake up shaking and she'd hold me until it passed. Never asked about it, just held me. His voice roughened. When she died, I thought maybe that was my punishment, for being a coward. You're not a coward. I ran. From the world. From people. From everything that mattered. That's not being a coward, that's being hurt. Vivian moved closer. You know what I think? I think the bravest thing you ever did wasn't fighting in the war or surviving alone on that mountain. It was pulling me out of the snow, because that meant caring again, risking loss again. That's real courage. Gideon looked at her. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just had to catch up. He laughed despite himself. Fair enough. My turn, Vivian said. Something true. Something I've never told anyone. She took a breath. I was glad. When I lost the baby. The confession hung in the air. Not because I didn't want it, she continued quickly, but because I knew, deep down, that boy would have left anyway. And I'd have been stuck raising a child alone, ruined, shamed, dependent on my father forever. Tears slipped down her cheeks. What kind of person is relieved about something like that? A person who was 19 and scared and abandoned, Gideon said gently. A person who deserved better than she got. I should have wanted that baby, should have mourned it properly. Who says you didn't mourn it? Just because you also felt relief doesn't make the grief less real. He wiped her tears with his thumb. People can feel two things at once. That doesn't make them bad, just makes them human. Vivian leaned into his touch. How do you always know what to say? I don't. Most of the time I've got no idea what I'm doing. Could have fooled me. That's because you're easy to fool. She shoved him, but gently. They settled against each other, watching the fire burn low. We're quite a pair, Vivian murmured. Two damaged people trying to figure out how to be whole. Maybe we don't need to be whole. Maybe we just need to be honest. About what? About who we are. What we want. What scares us. Gideon turned her face toward his. I'm terrified I'll lose you. That Caleb will catch up, or you'll realize you deserve better, or some random accident will take you away. That fear wakes me up at night. I'm terrified you'll regret this, Vivian admitted. That one day you'll look at me and realize you gave up everything, your mountain, your solitude, your whole life, for someone who might not be worth it. You are worth it. You don't know that. Not really. We barely know each other. I know you split wood until your hands bled and didn't complain once. I know you faced down armed men to save my life. I know you make terrible coffee and cheat at stone games and talk in your sleep about sparrows. Gideon smiled. That's enough to know you're worth it. Vivian's eyes filled with fresh tears. I talk about sparrows? Every night. That's embarrassing. It's adorable. She kissed him then, soft and slow, and Gideon felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, too much uncertainty ahead for peace. But acceptance. Whatever came next, good or bad, they'd face it together. That was enough. They made love beside the fire under a sky full of stars, and for the first time in 15 years, Gideon didn't think about ghosts, just about this woman in his arms, warm and real, and choosing him despite everything. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Vivian asked, What happens if they catch us? They won't. But if they do? Gideon thought about it. Then we fight, like we did before. And if fighting doesn't work, we run. And if running doesn't work... He stopped. What? Then at least we had this. These weeks. This time. Some people never get even that much. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know what the worst part would be? Not dying, but being separated. Forced to go back to Boston while you... That's not happening. You can't know that. Yes, I can, because I won't let it happen. I'll burn the world down first. The fierceness in his voice surprised them both. You mean that, Vivian said. Every word. She curled tighter against him. Then I believe you. They slept deeply that night, exhausted bodies finally demanding rest. When Gideon woke at dawn, Vivian was still sleeping, her face peaceful in the gray light. He watched her for a while, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across her face, the small scar on her forehead from the coach crash. She'd changed him, completely, irrevocably. And he wasn't sorry. They reached Kenton 2 days later, just as Gideon had predicted. The town was small, maybe 200 people, but it had everything they needed: a general store, a boarding house, a livery. Gideon sold some of his cached furs to the store owner, a weathered woman who didn't ask questions and didn't care about answers. "You two look like you've had a hard road," she observed, counting out coins. "Could say that," Gideon agreed. "Well, you're safe here. We don't much care where people come from, just that they pay their bills and don't cause trouble. We can do that." They bought supplies with the money: new boots for Vivian that actually fit, warm clothes, food, ammunition, though Gideon hoped they wouldn't need it, a proper coat for Vivian to replace the one she'd ruined. As they shopped, Gideon noticed Vivian watching a woman across the store. The woman held a baby on her hip while she examined fabric. The baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old, all chubby cheeks and curious eyes. Vivian's expression went distant. "You all right?" Gideon asked quietly. "Fine." But she wasn't. He could see it in her face. Later, when they'd settled into a room at the boarding house, the first real bed either had slept in for weeks, Gideon asked again. "The baby," Vivian said, "in the store. It just—" She shook her head. "Made me think about things." "What things?" Whether we'll ever... She couldn't finish. Gideon understood. "Do you want children?" "I don't know. Maybe. Someday." Vivian looked at him. "Do you?" "I know you lost. I know it must be hard to think about." It was. The thought of another child, another chance to fail, still terrified him. But looking at Vivian, imagining a future together, the terror felt less consuming. "I think," he said carefully, "that Sarah would want me to live. Really live. Not just survive. And maybe that includes eventually trying again." "You don't have to..." "I know. And not now. Not for a long time. We've got enough to figure out without adding a baby to the mix." He took her hand. "But someday?" "Maybe." Vivian smiled. "Maybe is enough." They stayed in Kenton for 3 days, resting and recovering. The landlady fed them real meals: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables that hadn't been dried or salted. Gideon's ribs began to heal. Vivian's blisters scabbed over. On the 3rd evening, they sat in the boarding house parlor with the other guests. An older couple traveling to visit their daughter, a young man heading west to find work, a widow returning home after burying her sister, normal people living normal lives. Gideon realized with a start that he and Vivian looked normal too, just another couple traveling west. Nobody stared. Nobody asked invasive questions. Nobody saw anything unusual about them. They'd become invisible, ordinary. It felt like freedom. That night, lying in the real bed with clean sheets, Vivian said, "We could stay here." "In Kenton? Why not? It's small, quiet. People mind their business. We could open a shop, or I could teach. You could, I don't know, hunt, trap, whatever you do." "You want to stay?" "I want to stop running." Vivian rolled onto her side to face him. "I'm tired, Gideon. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of wondering when they'll catch up. Maybe if we just stopped, they'd never find us." Gideon understood the temptation, but he also understood men like Caleb Mercer. "They'll find us," he said. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Someone will recognize you, word will spread, and they'll come." "So we run forever?" "No, we run until we're far enough that it doesn't matter. California, Oregon, hell, maybe all the way to Alaska." He pulled her close. "We run until we find somewhere we can actually build a life, not just hide." Vivian was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're right. I know you're right. I know. Wish it could be easier." "Me too." They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd learned the hard way that nothing worth having came easy. They left Kenton at dawn on the 4th day. The landlady packed them food for the journey and wished them luck. The store owner gave them an extra blanket, no charge. The young man heading west offered to travel together for safety, but Gideon politely declined. Better to stay unattached, unmemorable. They walked west through country that gradually changed. The mountains gave way to foothills. The foothills gave way to plains. Snow became rain, became sunshine. Winter loosened its grip one day at a time. They stopped in small towns when they needed supplies, never staying long enough to become familiar. They slept under stars and in haylofts and occasionally in cheap boarding houses. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other in ways that went deeper than words. Gideon discovered that Vivian hummed when she was happy, that she hated mornings but loved sunsets, that she could swear like a teamster when frustrated but cried at injured animals, that she was fiercely competitive about stupid things and gracious about important ones. Vivian learned that Gideon was quieter in the morning than the evening, that he noticed everything but commented on little, that he could track a rabbit through solid rock but couldn't remember which direction was north without checking the sun, that he loved terrible puns and felt guilty about finding them funny. They learned each other's bodies in cold camps and warm beds, in urgent desperation and lazy exploration. They learned each other's fears and hopes and the small stupid things that made them laugh. And somewhere between Kenton and the California border, Gideon realized he'd stopped waiting for loss. It happened one morning when he woke to find Vivian already up, making coffee over their campfire. She looked over and smiled, and Gideon felt his heart do that thing it had been doing lately, the thing that used to terrify him, but now just felt right. "Morning," she said. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." "Good." She poured him coffee. "Because we've got a long day ahead. I figure another week to Sacramento if we keep this pace. You in a hurry?" "Little bit. Want to find somewhere we can actually stop moving." Gideon sipped the coffee. It was terrible, as always. He didn't mention it. "What do we do when we get there?" he asked. "Sacramento, I mean." "I was thinking..." Vivian sat beside him. "What if we opened something? A store, maybe? Or a lodge, like you talked about? Somewhere people could come experience the mountains safely." "That was just talk." "Was it?" Because it sounded like something you actually wanted. Gideon considered. A lodge. Teaching people to survive in the wilderness without dying. Sharing the mountains he loved without the isolation, with Vivian beside him. "Maybe it was," he admitted. "Then let's do it. Not in Sacramento. Too big, too many questions. But somewhere outside, somewhere we can build something real." "You'd want that? After everything? You'd go back to the mountains?" "Different mountains. Different life." Vivian took his hand. "And not alone. That's the difference." Gideon looked at her. This woman who'd survived a coach crash and a blizzard and a siege and a 3-week journey through hostile country. This woman who'd learned to shoot and trap and fight for herself. This woman who'd chosen him when she could have chosen safety. "All right," he said. "Let's do it." They shook hands solemnly, sealing the deal like business partners. Then Vivian burst out laughing. "What?" Gideon asked. "We just made a major life decision over terrible coffee in the middle of nowhere and sealed it with a handshake." "So?" "So it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect." Gideon grinned. "You're insane." "Takes one to know one." They broke camp and continued west, talking through their plans. Where to look for land, how to build, what to call the place. The conversation lasted for miles, spinning out possibilities and dreams. It felt good. It felt real. It felt like a future. They crossed into California on a bright afternoon in early April. No dramatic moment, no signs or fanfare, just a shift in the landscape, a change in the air. But Gideon felt it anyway, the sense that they'd crossed some invisible line into new territory, new lives. "We made it," Vivian said. "Yeah, we did." She turned to him, eyes bright. "What now?" "Now we find somewhere to stop." They found it 2 weeks later. A valley north of Sacramento, tucked between pine-covered mountains. A stream ran through it, clear and cold. Meadows spread out on both sides, perfect for building. And it was remote enough that casual travelers wouldn't stumble across it, but close enough to civilization for supplies. "This is it," Vivian said when they crested the ridge and saw it spread out below. "This is where we stay." Gideon looked, really looked, at the land, at the possibilities, at the woman beside him. Yeah, he agreed. This is it. They spent the next months building. A cabin first, bigger than Gideon's old one, with real windows and a stone fireplace and room to grow. Then outbuildings, a stable, a workshop. Slowly, a homestead took shape. They worked from dawn to dusk, falling into bed exhausted every night. Gideon's hands remembered the work of building, the rhythm of axe and hammer. Vivian learned carpentry alongside him, her small hands becoming strong and capable. They had help. A few times, travelers passed through and offered labor in exchange for meals and shelter. Gideon accepted cautiously, watching for any sign of recognition. But if anyone noticed that Vivian matched the description of a missing Boston heiress, they didn't mention it. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe the world was bigger than Caleb Mercer's reach. By late summer, the main cabin was finished. They celebrated by cooking a real meal, venison stew, fresh bread, wild berries, and eating it at their own table in their own house. To new beginnings, Vivian said, raising a cup of actually decent coffee. To surviving, Gideon countered. To us. To us. They clinked cups and drank and felt the weight of the past year settle into something manageable. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. But integrated into who they'd become. That night, lying in their bed in their house, Vivian said, I need to tell you something. The serious tone made Gideon's stomach clench. What? I wrote to my father. Gideon sat up. You what? Just a letter, telling him I'm alive and safe, that I'm not coming back, that he should tell Caleb to stop looking. She met his eyes. I didn't tell him where we are, just I needed him to know I'm not dead. Vivian, I know it's a risk, but he's my father. He deserves to know. Gideon wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the ways this could go wrong. But looking at her face, he understood. Some debts had to be paid even when they weren't owed. All right, he said, but if anyone shows up, we run. I know. I mean it. So do I. They watched each other in the dim light. Then Gideon pulled her close and they didn't talk about it anymore. 3 months passed. 4. No one came. Gideon began to think maybe they'd actually pulled it off. Maybe they really were free. Then one afternoon in October, a rider appeared at the edge of the property. Gideon saw him from the workshop where he was building furniture for the lodge they'd started planning. His hand went automatically to the rifle leaning against the wall. Vivian, he called, get inside. But Vivian was already coming out of the cabin, shading her eyes against the sun. The rider approached slowly, hands visible and empty. As he got closer, Gideon could make out details. Older man, maybe 60. Weathered face, expensive but travel-worn clothes. He looked like money, like Boston. Gideon raised the rifle. Far enough. The rider stopped. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? I'm looking for my daughter. The man's voice cracked. Vivian Ashcroft. Beside Gideon, Vivian went rigid. Don't know anyone by that name, Gideon said. Please, I know she's here. I just want to talk to her. The man's eyes found Vivian. Please, Viv. 5 minutes. Vivian took a shaky breath. It's all right, Gideon. Let him come. Like hell. He's my father. Let him come. Every instinct Gideon had screamed danger, but Vivian's hand on his arm was steady. 5 minutes, Gideon said. Then he leaves. The man, Vivian's father, dismounted and walked toward them. Up close, Gideon could see the resemblance. Same dark eyes, same stubborn jaw. Mr. Vance, I presume, the man said. How'd you find us? Your letter. He looked at Vivian. It was postmarked from a town north of Sacramento. I've been searching the area for weeks. Alone? Gideon didn't believe that. Alone. I didn't tell anyone, not Caleb, not the law, not anyone. The man's voice shook. I just needed to know you were safe. Vivian stepped forward. I'm safe, Father. You can see that. Can I? Her father looked her over. The rough clothes, the work-hardened hands, the sun-darkened skin. You look like what? Like someone who's been surviving? Vivian's voice hardened. I am surviving. I'm happy, free. Everything you tried to take from me. I never meant... He stopped, swallowed. I was desperate. The debts, the shame. I thought I was protecting you. By selling me? By giving you security, stability, a future. You gave me a cage. The words hit her father like blows. He aged 10 years in front of them. I know, he said finally. I know that now. Seeing what Caleb became after you left, the rage, the obsession, I realized what I'd almost done to you. Tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. I'm so sorry, Vivian. I'm so desperately sorry. Vivian stood frozen. Gideon could see the war on her face, anger and grief and longing all tangled together. Did he send you? She asked. Caleb? No, he doesn't know I'm here. As far as he knows, you died in that coach crash. Her father paused. I may have encouraged that belief. Why? Because you're my daughter, and I failed you once. I won't do it again. The silence stretched out. Gideon kept the rifle ready, not trusting this yet. Then Vivian said, What do you want from me? Nothing. Just to know you're all right, that you're... He gestured at the cabin, the land, Gideon. That you're happy. I am. Then that's enough. He turned to Gideon. You're taking care of her? Best I can. And she's taking care of you? Gideon glanced at Vivian. Better than I deserve. Her father nodded slowly. Then he did something that shocked them both. He extended his hand to Gideon. Thank you. For saving her. For choosing her. For giving her the life I couldn't. Gideon looked at the offered hand. At this man who'd sold his daughter and now stood here broken by guilt and loss. He shook it. Take care of each other, Vivian's father said. He looked at his daughter one last time. I won't come back. Won't tell anyone where you are. You have my word. I believe you, Vivian said quietly. He nodded, climbed back on his horse, and rode away. They watched until he disappeared into the trees. Then Vivian turned and buried her face in Gideon's chest. She didn't cry, just stood there shaking while Gideon held her. You all right? He asked after a while. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. They stood there in the October sunshine, holding on to each other while the world kept turning, and somewhere a father rode back to his empty house and tried to figure out how to live with his mistakes. That night, Vivian asked, Do you think he meant it? About not telling anyone? Yeah, I do. How can you be sure? Because I saw it in his eyes. The guilt, the shame. He knows what he almost did to you. Gideon touched her face. And because if he'd wanted to hurt us, he'd have brought men. So we're really safe. As safe as we're going to get. Vivian nodded. Then she smiled, small and tentative, but real. Then we can actually do this. Build our lodge. Make a life here. You still want that? More than ever. They spent the winter finishing the lodge. It wasn't fancy, just a large building with rooms for guests and a common area with a massive fireplace. But it was solid and warm and welcoming. Gideon built it to withstand any storm. Vivian made it feel like home. They opened the following spring. The first guests were a young couple from Sacramento looking for adventure. Gideon taught them to fish and track and survive in the wilderness. Vivian cooked meals and told stories and made them feel safe. The couple left after a week, satisfied and whole. More came after. Families wanting to experience nature. Young men seeking themselves. Older couples looking for peace. Gideon and Vivian welcomed them all, sharing the mountains without the isolation, the beauty without the danger. The lodge grew, their reputation spread. Within 2 years, they were booked months in advance. And through it all, Gideon and Vivian built their life together. They fought sometimes, about money and guests and stupid things that didn't matter, but they always came back together, always remembered what they'd survived to get here. They laughed more than they fought, worked side by side, fell into bed exhausted most nights, and woke up grateful most mornings. It wasn't perfect. Some days Gideon still woke from nightmares about Sarah and the war and all the ways he'd failed. Some days Vivian still tensed when strangers arrived, afraid it might be Caleb or his men. But those days grew fewer. And when they came, they faced them together. On a spring morning 3 years after they'd arrived in California, Vivian woke Gideon with news. I'm pregnant. Gideon sat up so fast he nearly fell out of bed. What? Pregnant. With child. Having a baby. She smiled nervously. Surprise? Terror flooded through him, instant and overwhelming. All the old fears. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? What if he failed again, crashed down at once? Vivian saw it in his face. Hey, look at me. He did. I'm scared too, she said. Terrified, actually. But we're not the same people we were. We're stronger, smarter. We have help. There's a doctor in town, a midwife, people who care about us. She took his hand. And we have each other. I can't lose you. You won't. You don't know that. No, but I choose to believe it anyway. Vivian placed his hand on her still flat stomach. This baby, our baby, deserves parents who believe in the future, not ones who live in fear of the past. Gideon felt something shift inside him. The terror didn't disappear, but it made room for something else. Hope. All right, he said. All right, we do this. Together? Together. The baby came in November during the first snowfall. Labor was long and difficult. Gideon paced outside the room like a caged animal while the midwife and doctor worked. Every cry from Vivian drove knives through his heart. This is wrong, he told the doctor when the man emerged for supplies. Something's wrong. Everything's normal, the doctor assured him. First babies take time. Your wife is strong. You're sure? I'm sure. Now stop hovering and let us work. Gideon forced himself to wait, to trust, to believe that this time would be different. Then he heard it, a baby's cry. Thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. The door opened. The midwife emerged, smiling. You have a daughter, healthy, perfect, and your wife is asking for you. Gideon stumbled into the room. Vivian lay in bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Come meet her, she said. He approached slowly, afraid to breathe. Vivian pulled back the blanket and showed him a wrinkled red face, tiny fists, eyes squeezed shut. Their daughter. She's so small, Gideon whispered. She's perfect. Vivian looked up at him. Do you want to hold her? Did he? Every instinct screamed to run, to protect himself from the inevitable loss. But Vivian trusted him. This tiny creature trusted him. He took his daughter in his arms. She weighed nothing, fit perfectly against his chest, and when she opened her eyes, dark like Vivian's, and looked at him, something in Gideon's chest broke open completely. Not in pain, in joy. Hello, he said to his daughter. I'm your father, and I'm going to do better this time, I promise. The baby yawned and closed her eyes again, already bored with him. Vivian laughed. She's got your stubbornness, and your attitude. Poor thing doesn't stand a chance. They sat together, the three of them, while snow fell outside and the lodge settled into winter quiet. Guests had gone home. The world had shrunk to just this room, this moment, this family. What should we name her? Vivian asked. Gideon thought. What about Margaret? After your mother? Vivian's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that? She deserves to be remembered by someone who'll hear all the good stories. Margaret Sarah, Vivian said, after both of them. Margaret Sarah Vance. Gideon tested it. Yeah, that works. They named their daughter after the women they'd loved and lost, and in doing so, honored the past while building the future. Margaret Sarah Vance grew up strong and wild and loved beyond measure. She learned to track from her father and read from her mother. She could skin a rabbit by age 8 and recite poetry by heart. She was fearless and kind and stubborn as hell. When she was 5, she asked why they didn't have grandparents like other children. Gideon and Vivian looked at each other across the dinner table. We do, Vivian said carefully, but they live far away. Why don't they visit? Because sometimes families are complicated, but that doesn't mean they don't love us. Margaret considered this with the serious concentration only children possess. Do I have to love them if I've never met them? No. You get to decide who you love. Then I love you and Papa and the mountains and our guests, and that's enough. More than enough, Gideon agreed. As the years passed, more children came. A son they named James, after the baby Vivian had lost. Twin girls, Sarah and Rose, who arrived screaming and never really stopped. The lodge prospered. Word spread about the mountain man and his educated wife, who ran the friendliest wilderness lodge in California. People came from all over to fish, to hunt, to find themselves, to heal. Gideon and Vivian welcomed them all, sharing the lessons they'd learned the hard way. That survival wasn't about isolation, it was about connection. That strength came from vulnerability, not from walls. That love wasn't safe, but it was worth the risk anyway. On Gideon's 50th birthday, he woke before dawn and climbed to the ridge above the lodge. Below him, smoke rose from the chimneys. He could see Vivian through the window, already up and making coffee. 20 years. 20 years since he'd pulled her from the snow, since she'd pulled him from his own grave. They'd built something good here, something that mattered. 4 children, a thriving business, a community of friends and guests who'd become family. A life worth living. Behind him, footsteps crunched in the snow. Vivian appeared, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and stood beside him, looking at their lodge. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing." Gideon wrapped his arm around her. "How we got here." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." "Liar." But she smiled. "You regret teaching James to trap. He's better at it than you now." "That I do regret." They stood together watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink. Somewhere below, their children were waking up. Guests were starting to stir. Another day beginning. "You know what I realized?" Vivian said. "What?" "That mountain, Wolverine Peak. It didn't take anything from us. It gave us everything." She looked up at him. "It gave us each other. It taught us we were stronger than we thought. It showed us what really matters." "What really matters?" "This, us, family, home." She gestured at the valley. "Building something that lasts." Gideon thought about it, about the cabin that burned, the siege, the desperate flight through winter, all the pain and fear and uncertainty. "You're right," he said. "We lost everything on that mountain, but we found each other, and that made the rest possible." "Think we should tell the children? The whole story?" "Someday, when they're old enough to understand." "What will we tell them?" Gideon considered. "The truth, that their mother was the bravest person I ever met, that she taught me how to live again, that love isn't about being perfect, it's about choosing each other, every day, even when it's hard." Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's a good story." "It's our story. Best one I know." They finished their coffee as the sun climbed higher. Then they walked back down to the lodge together, ready for whatever the day brought, because they'd learned the most important lesson of all. That home wasn't a place. It was the people you chose and who chose you back. It was building something together from nothing. It was the small daily acts of love and partnership and choosing each other again and again. The mountains had given them back their lives, but they'd given themselves to each other. And that, more than survival, more than safety, more than anything else, was the real happy ending. Not perfect, not easy, but real and lasting and worth every frozen mile, every bullet fired, every moment of terror, because in the end, the storms that nearly destroyed them became the very things that made them whole,